Good evening. Welcome to the Town of Avon Advisory Plan Commission meeting. If you are interested in having a copy of the agenda or the staff reports, they are available on the tables to the right of the audience. We will be conducting business as outlined on the agenda, and from time to time, the board may deviate from the agenda. As president of this body, I will inform those in attendance of any deviations. This meeting is being recorded for the public record. Because of this, we request that personal conversations are kept to a minimum and all cell phones are set to vibrate with any phone calls taken outside of the chambers. If you are interested in commenting during the public hearing, please sign up on the sheets located on the tables to the right of the audience. When your name is called, please step forward to the podium and state your name and address for the record. Please address your comments to the board and not to staff or to the petitioner. Your comments should relate directly to the case at hand. Responses to public comments will be given once the hearing is closed. We do understand that there may be several persons who wish to speak. In order to keep the meeting running in a timely fashion, we would request that you not repeat previous comments. Thank you for your assistance in facilitating a respectful, fair, and timely meeting. Welcome to our meeting, and please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Ian, shall we take a roll call?
Captain Ranford.
Here.
Paul Gutenberg.
Here.
Mason Pike.
Here.
Dave Kaufman.
Here.
Harold Iser.
Here.
Ed Rosenbaum.
Here.
Thank you. Has everybody had the opportunity to read the previous meeting's minutes? We didn't send those out, did we? Okay, so those will be at the next meeting. Committee reports.
I have a redevelopment commission update, if that's appropriate time for that.
I believe so. Yes. Go ahead.
Okay, great. We had our redevelopment commission meeting last Monday, February 21st. We had a quorum. It's a very productive meeting. Three things I'd like to highlight. First, we just a number of invoices were approved, a number of them relating to the work done here at the town hall. Second, just an update was given by staff regarding Country Road 100 South and the improvements being done there. The report was that they're on track to finalize and finish everything up by August as was projected. And then last but not least, there was a good discussion around a need for a right-of-way requiring a parcel along Dan Jones for the widening at some future date. So that's our update.
Thanks, Mason.
With respect to the Board of Zoning Appeals, there were two cases on that agenda. One was the request for a pole barn that was larger than the height of the primary structure. That was approved, subject to two conditions. And then there was a special exception for a drive-in restaurant in the Harvest Landing commercial subdivision, and that was also approved. And I have nothing for from the town council.
Okay. And do we have any other committee reports? No? Okay, moving on. Do we have any requests for continuances or agenda modifications? Public comments. This is an opportunity when the public may comment on items that are not on tonight's agenda. These are for other items. If it's on the agenda, you'll have an opportunity to speak when that item comes up. So are there any public comments? Has anybody signed up for comments for items not on the agenda tonight? Okay. Anybody from the audience wishing to speak about anything not on the agenda? Okay, let's get to it. We have several items, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 items on the agenda. It's a busy night. So the intent of this commission is to keep things going. So I would ask people to please remember that if somebody else has already spoken and said what you want to say, I know it may take away from your moment in the sun, but let's try and keep that limited. We don't have Bill or Ian, do we have any introductions this evening?
We don't.
Okay, let's move on to old business. First item is ZA 22-01 Rise Development.
This is a request for rezoning of 2 acres from AG agricultural to R1 single family residential, and a rezoning of 2 acres from AG to I2 to perpetuate the existing single family residential land uses, to incorporate 2 acres of property into a proposed adjoining industrial development, and to allow for the subdivision of this property through the platting process. There is some history on this property, almost all of it recent. Last year, there was a rezoning of adjoining property to the I2 zoning district to provide for development of flex space and storage. And then there was a development plan review petition filed late last year to develop that property. This is a request to rezone 2 single-family residential properties. Both of those 2 properties are 2 acres in size, from AG to I2 and R1. The purpose of this dual zoning is to allow these 2 properties to be subdivided, with roughly half of each property incorporated into that industrial development that was reviewed, but that was rezoned last year to the east, and then the remaining acreage retained by their current owners, and the existing single-family residential land use is perpetuated on the property. As I said, each property is currently approximately 2 acres in size, zoned agricultural, but the minimum lot size in the agricultural zoning district is 5 acres. Since these lots were created prior to the adoption of zoning, they are considered legally established non-conforming lots. However, when a subdivision is being requested on the properties, the subdivision does have to affirm that the subdivision complies with the zoning ordinance. And as a result, since the lots currently do not comply with the minimum lot standard of the zoning ordinance, And then the obviously subsequent 1 acre lot would not comply with a minimum of the ag zoning district. The petitioner has to rezone those lots, those portions of those lots to R1 to allow for the subdivision of the property. The back 2 acres of the lots would be rezoned to I2. They would be incorporated into an adjoining parcel that would ultimately be about 13.6 acres in size. We are requesting commitments for the industrial portion of the development, and we ask that those commitments be retroactively applied to the whole 13.6 acre property. The reason for the commitment request is that during the original rezoning petition, the petitioner did assure both the Plan Commission and the Town Council that the development being proposed would be attractive and of high quality. And when the rezoning request was completed, the petitioner submitted building elevations for review through the development plan review process. The buildings essentially became pole barns. There's been some discussion about what the architectural standards that we're requesting as part of this, or requiring as part of the development plan review process. The first commitment that we've proposed is taken directly from section 4.87. 4-8.7B of the current zoning ordinance. And this is basically the architectural requirements for non-residential buildings along all of Avon's major corridors. So it establishes a floor for the development plan for any developments that occur in the along the major corridors of Avon. And then the overlay districts then augment those and create additional restrictions. With respect to the 11-inch overhang, this commitment is a compromise essentially from a 3-foot overhang that the ordinance requires. And what we are in essence saying is that we can accept an overhang less than what the ordinance requires, provided that those overhangs are at least 11 inches. And the petitioner doesn't agree to either one of these commitments. The petitioner argues against these minimal standards because these requirements increase expenses, and to that the staff does agree, and we assert, yes, that's exactly the point. Avon wants durable, attractive, quality development, especially along its major corridors and gateway corridors like the Ronald Reagan corridor. And so we do recommend approval of the rezoning, but we do recommend approval of that subject to 3 commitments. The drawings you see up top right now are basically what I've just said in a much easier to read visual form, showing you the areas here where there is a industrial rezoning, and then these 2 1-acre lots here would ultimately be the single family residential R1 pieces. This development shows the layout of the industrial portion, the eventual layout perhaps. So this is the most recent copy of the development plan that's still going through the process right now. There might be some changes to this as the fire department and other agencies have weighed in a little bit on this one. And this is essentially the elevations that are being proposed. It's about 40% masonry on the front elevation with some siding up there. And those are for the 5 or so buildings that actually front Ronald Reagan. The remaining buildings will all be steel pole barn construction. So these are our recommendations. We recommend a favorable recommendation subject to the following 3 commitments. A 35-foot half right-of-way dedicated along County Road 1050 East. That building shall use brick or stone materials on the exterior walls except the rear exterior wall, and excluding windows, doors, roofing, fascia, and soffits, which will also include at least 2 architectural features and at least 2 colors and textures. Appropriate architectural features may include, but not limited to, cornice, bay windows, et cetera, et cetera. And then the 3rd commitment is the building roof shall have no less than an 11-inch overhang. With that, we would recommend, or we do recommend approval subject to those commitments. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
I do have one question. So when you talk about the 3-foot overhang to 11 inches, Why 11 inches and not sticking with 3 foot?
11 inches provides a visual extension from the roof. The way they are right now, the roof essentially ends right at the wall. And we were just trying to get some overhang to provide some visual architectural feature rather than just a rectangular box with a low pitched roof on it. So that the ordinance requires a 3-foot overhang. The ordinance actually requires or actually has 4 different options, but most of those options are for flat roofs. When you're using a pitched roof, it has to be a certain pitch, and the petitioner has done that. It's just they haven't provided any of the overhangs that they're required by the ordinance.
So if we didn't read these commitments into a motion, would they be required to follow the ordinance and all the architectural standards of the ordinance?
Yeah, I mean, the big difference between this one and say the ordinance. So the ordinance, they can request a waiver by the planning commission, and the planning commission has the opportunity to approve it. If you make them recorded commitments associated with the rezoning, then they don't get that option. They have to comply with them unless they come back to you with a modification of commitments at some later date and get those commitments modified. So they have a little bit more stringent application. I mean, the staff's, what we maintain is these are requirements of the ordinance right now. And they could very well file waivers and seek relief from the plan commission or the development plan review process. The problem that we've had is the petitioner says that has essentially implied that we're making up standards that aren't in the ordinance. And I think I provided a letter showing you him implying that in any way, in any case, which isn't the case. Both the standards we're requesting are in the ordinance. They're just, in fact, one of them is a compromise from the requirements of the ordinance.
Bill, I have several questions. So I want to make certain I'm thinking of the right place. I tried to drive by this place. It's kind of hard to find. But, so there's 2 houses there right now, correct?
Yes. Yeah, there's 2 houses.
And those are going to stay as they are. Is that, or
They
they're
are.
not tearing those down. Those are going to stay as they are.
They are. There's a little creek that sort of bisects
But kind of
these
back-
2
back
lots.
Behind it.
Right, and they're gonna basically split those lots at where that creek is.
So I guess I need a little bit of history on this. So when they originally went industrial, that was a rezoned when? When was that rezoning? When it went
Well,
I-2?
The adjoining property, that the 2 industrial, or the industrial portion of this rezoning is gonna be incorporated into was approved last year.
So
so
they
the-
didn't include the residential things in their original request?
No, nor did they, or the back half of these lots.
So now they're coming back saying we need more land?
Right, they wanna add additional acreage.
So when they did the original I-2 zoning, what building zoning requirements were put on that last year when they went I-2?
What the ordinance requires. And
And so now they're asking for a variance from those ordinances.
they have a waiver on file in the development plan review process, yes.
I'm also a little confused in that, and again, I'm kind of new on the board, so Avon goes pretty far. There's already, if I'm at the right location, there's already a large warehouse across Ronald Reagan.
Right.
I assume that's Plainfield, is that correct? Or is that Avon?
Well, the one that's under construction is Avon, in Avon.
The one that's already there existing is Plainfield, though, right?
That would be
So
probably
we got this
in
little
Plainfield.
niche that goes further south, that's Avon, and this is in our town.
Yeah.
It looks like to the north of this property, there's a street or something, they're digging, or what are they putting in there?
So there's a property zone C2 to the north of the property on Ronald Reagan. Right now, there's no development, but there's a platted right-of-way through that to extend a street, essentially
Ronald Reagan?
through 1050 to Ronald Reagan and all the way over into Plainfield's territory
So they're going to do a cut on Ronald Reagan to that street adjoining it. that they're
for
putting
the
right now.
industrial building, yeah.
So have they already got approved to have a cut on Ronald Reagan for this industrial? place?
They're not going to get a cut on
I
this.
thought it showed on your map they had a cut.
Mm-hmm.
So how are they going to get into this property? then?
It'll be right in, right out only.
I'm sorry, right in, right out, what does that mean?
Oh, that means that anybody
Could you
that's,
put the map up there that with the white one, that, yeah.
So to get into this property, you'd have to make a right in here and you can only get a right
But that
out
cut
here.
doesn't exist right now on Ronald Reagan, does it?
Well, this drive, when you say cut, you're talking about the driveway right here, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, this will be a new driveway.
yeah, off
Okay.
on
Right.
on Ronald Reagan.
I
And
was
just
pres-
north of that, there's going to be another cut on Ronald Reagan. Well, I think Ronald Reagan's split here too, isn't it?
It is.
So they're not going
it's
to be
a-
able to cross from the other side to get into this property. right?
Not, that's when you said cut. That's why I was assuming that you were asking if the boulevard was going to be broken, and the boulevard isn't going to be broken here, but it will be broken up here.
So there's no entrance to the back where the two houses are.
Originally there was, but apparently the petitioner has removed that. They're talking to the fire department. I think the fire department wants that access point, but
So, and what's the dotted line going, like a pathway there on the top? What's,
this,
yeah. that goes-
that's the creek.
No, put the cursor down and going across. It looks like a
Here?
sidewalk or a trail or something. No, just more to your left. Right, yeah, now go down a little bit. So those two dotted lines have got a lane. What's that?
Those are just setback lines.
Okay, okay. Why is there no parking around the other buildings?
The buildings themselves either are flex space, which have like a warehouse and small office in it.
But wouldn't you need parking around them?
Well,
Is there no requirements for parking around buildings?
not not this particular type style. So they've provided a significant amount of parking here. Then they've put small parking lots elsewhere around the area. They've actually got more parking on this site plan than they need by the ordinance.
So are there parking, like to the north there, are there parking spots for those 5 buildings that aren't indicated on this map?
For these buildings right here?
No, to the north. I think to the left is north, right? Or am I wrong? Because it's Ronald Reagan heads north. It's those 5 buildings.
Right up
Yeah,
here?
right there. I see no parking for those 5 buildings.
There's a
I
little
see a
parking
bridge you have
lot.
to walk across, looks like.
Yeah,
to get
there's a
to
little
it.
parking lot right here.
Well, that's 5 spaces.
And yeah, these buildings all have overhead doors on them. And so they have parking, they would park inside. These aren't retail uses. They're sort of uses that are going to either be used for storage or they're going to be used for like contractor businesses and those types of businesses. So it's not a retail use necessarily where you're going to get lots of customer traffic on it.
When I drove by, I didn't see any petition signs saying that we were having a meeting tonight with the neighbors. Should there been?
There should have been, yeah.
I didn't see any.
Do any of you have other questions for staff? The petitioner would like to come forward.
Good evening. My name is Jim Sapp. I'm the developer. This is my family company, my wife and I. I'm located at 8070 Castleton Road,
Indianapolis, Indiana. Let me answer a few of your questions. We're primarily storage in the back. Companies store things in 300 to 3,000 square foot warehouses. They come in, they put their widgets in it or their products, and then they leave. They may be back in 2 weeks, they may be back in a month. There's a handful that come in daily. So we don't need parking behind the gate. We have excess parking in the front. The front does have flex space. There's small flex space, like 400 square foot of office, and then a small warehouse. So those flex space people would be your plumbers, electricians, subcontractors. They need a little office, and then the warehouses are in back. It is right in, right out. Originally, we had an emergency exit for fire trucks, police on 1050.
What does right in, right, I'm sorry, what does right in, right out mean?
Well, if you're coming from Plainfield, you can only turn into our
Right, okay,
project
that's what that, okay.
right in. And to exit, you have to turn right out and go towards Avon.
And you don't think that's a problem?
No, we have it in other, this is our 11th facility. These people aren't in there coming 2 or 3 times a day. These people are coming once or twice a week primarily. There's a few contractors that do come daily. They just figure out the roads. They know how to get in and out. We're extremely successful. All of our established facilities have waiting lists to get in. Castleton, Greenwood, Noblesville. We've already built phase 2 on those. Greenwood's building phase 3. We have 30 businesses waiting in Castleton. Noblesville has a wait list too. We are a first to market business.
In Castleton, what street are you on in Castleton?
Castleton Road. We're on 82nd and Bash, basically, right off 69. We're first to market, meaning there's nobody doing small warehouses for growing businesses. 70% of our customers are small growing businesses. 30%, however, are big businesses like McDonald's, AT&T, Cardinal Health that are doing projects in the area. We feel this location that's on Ronald Reagan between 2 interstates and by the airport is prime incubator and accelerator for businesses. And that's what we see in Columbus, Ohio, Toledo, Cleveland. Businesses grow in us. We will have 125 businesses in here, and we'll have 425 employees based out of here. But our traffic count is only about 100 a day, 125. So we don't have a lot of cars or trucks coming in, but they're based out of there. They come in Monday morning, get their product, and leave. And they may not be back for 2 weeks. Does that give you a little more business model of us?
Why should we give you a variance off of what the zoning requirements currently have for this location?
Because price is very important to our customers. They're accelerating businesses.
To me, that's not a very good answer.
The second reason is it's not needed. You can't see anything except these buildings from the street. These buildings will be brick, cultured brick, wood, glass, very attractive.
But you understand, this is the common thoroughfare to the airport and back.
If I could just, interrupt. Tonight, we're here to discuss the waiver request for the acreage.
The zoning, yes.
Yeah, the
That's what I'm
zoning.
talking about.
Well,
As a,
Am I not? I'm sorry. am I wrong?
Well, we're not talking about the development plan approval, we're talking about zoning of 4 acres.
No, in the back.
you're,
Go ahead.
It's in the subdivision.
you're,
Sure, go ahead.
we can talk about the aesthetics of it. We are asking for a waiver next month.
Did you post signs for the petition tonight?
Yes.
Didn't see them, sorry.
And we also did the mailing.
Thank you.
have
Jeremy.
you spoken to, I'm assuming that you're working with the landowners?
Yes.
And
they're-
are they here
they're
this
here.
evening? Okay,
You want to raise your hands?
okay, very good.
So we're just asking for rezoning tonight. The original plot was not big enough due to the topo on the property. There were low spots, real high spots, and it wasn't working. So we asked the neighbors to sell their back property on the other side of the creek. So tonight, we're just asking for a rezone of the owners back 2 acres. That's really what tonight is about. But aesthetics are important, and we think our buildings, we didn't get them to the town soon enough. The architect was behind. It didn't come in till last week when Mr. Peoples got it. But tonight is just the back 2 acres to join what's already rezoned.
And can we assume that the property owners are amenable to this arrangement?
And they signed the waivers, and they are all agreeable to the rezoning.
This is perhaps a question for the staff if they do know, but again, if the petitioner knows, on 200 South, if you're going south on Ronald Reagan and there's that light at 200 South, are U-turns permitted? I'm just thinking if I was a driver or contractor coming from the north, again, I don't know if that's our jurisdiction or not, but.
I don't, I think it is our jurisdiction, but I don't know normally they're permitted unless specifically prohibited. But I can't recall if there's a no U-turn sign on that light or not.
Just something I think we should be tracking on so that if this progresses and there's a right in and right out, knowing myself, I'd go down, hang a U-turn at the intersection, come back, and that can sometimes be difficult or dangerous, so.
Yeah.
We really feel that they're probably going to the new DRG. That's a huge development, and that's where the first cut will be north of us, or it's already there. The new DRG, it's just a straight concrete. You've all seen it. So they could go down there. We do agree with the town in giving the 35-foot setback on 1050. We're in agreement with your recommendation there. We are asking for a waiver on a few of the aesthetics of the building and the stone. But I think that should be brought up at the next meeting. Is that correct, Mr. Peoples? Or do you want to talk about it now?
Well, tonight's
No,
just
no, I mean,
about
we're on,
rezoning.
yeah, I
And
mean,
we've got a lot of things on the
Okay.
agenda, so.
So we kindly ask for your approval of the rezoning of the back 2 acres. If there are any other questions about our business model, I'll be glad to answer those. We feel strongly we'll be very successful as we have in the 3 other locations in central Indiana.
Questions for the petitioner?
I have a question,
Sure.
follow up. So if I understand you correctly, you're agreeable to the 35-foot right of way? Is that what you just shared?
Yes, yes.
And then what's your position with respect to the 11-inch overhang?
We feel in the handbook, it says it has to be 3 foot. Mr. Peoples suggested the 11 inches. We are opposed to that or ask for a waiver. We feel our forklifts will hit it and trucks will hit it. We don't think there's any practical reason to have 11-inch. Nobody can see behind our fences and buildings. This is what our number one thing our customers want is security. So from both 1050, and that's blocked with houses, and behind these buildings, you're not going to see the back. So we feel that the 11-inch overhang will get in the way and get hit.
And then with respect to the staff's request for number 2, it's a very long,
Sure.
list. I mean, are there any parts of that you are agreeable to, or are you opposed to it in its entirety?
No, we're agreeable to part of it. We're agreeable to put stone, brick, wood, glass on the front. We are suggesting we use cultured stone. I brought some, and Mr. Peoples has some. It has a 50-year warranty. It has mortar here. It's lighter for the building, and it is more economical. We have to keep our rents down in order to get rentals. So it's a very nice look. The city of Noblesville approved it. It's going to look similar to this. So as far as that, we're just proposing the front of the buildings have the brick and stone and wood. The sides and the 2 sides will not. They will be steel, but they will not be visible from the street.
And would that
Proposal?
That's our proposal.
would only be on the buildings facing or up against Ronald Reagan, or is that all buildings?
It'll only be on the buildings facing Ronald Reagan. The rest of them are shielded by fences, buildings, and shrubbery. So you're not going to see anything. When you come down Ronald Reagan, you're just going to see that. And on 1050, we're higher than 1050. You're really just going to see fences.
Thanks.
Is there any questions relating to the zoning?
Yes, I don't understand why number 2 and number 3 in our motions here, why aren't we just making a motion then on the rezoning? Why are we getting into the buildings and the architecture tonight? I don't understand.
so those would be commitments on the rezoning, those would be additional.
For just those 2 acres?
Right.
Oh,
Well,
not
our
for the
staff
rest?
report is asking them to make it retroactive to the whole development, whole 13
well, then
acres.
we are talking about the whole thing then tonight.
Well, just, we're asking for that. You don't, it doesn't necessarily have to
Are
happen.
you, Mr. Sapp said something about coming back next time for another
They
meeting?
don't agree to the commitment, so that'd be up to.
We don't agree to the 3 of them. We agree to the first one. The second 2, we've asked for a waiver, but it was my understanding that happens at DPR.
So these are ordinance requirements. They do have the opportunity to ask for a waiver during the development plan review process, and they have filed that waiver of these standards.
So we're assuming, so
DPR.
if I understand what you're saying, if we pass this motion as it's tonight, then they're going to reject it and come back for a variance on what we passed tonight. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, it wouldn't be a variance. I mean, if you don't incorporate it, I guess the question is, do you incorporate these commitments or do you forward these commitments to the town council with this recommendation, knowing the petitioner doesn't agree to them? And let the town council impose them, or do you not? I mean, do you modify them and change them in a way? In our staff report, we said, we're not a big fan of putting ordinance requirements in as commitments because we're basically saying comply with the law. However, we've had a lot of difficulty getting the petitioner to agree to any sort of architectural distinction on these buildings.
So are you saying this is just putting a little more, putting a little more teeth into the approval process?
In a way, yeah, it's putting a little bit more teeth. Now, the problem with it is you can't do, you wouldn't be able to modify it with the simple waiver. So they become requirements that have to be met. They don't
But the
have the.
waiver, these waiver requests are scheduled to be addressed elsewhere?
Yeah, so these are requirements of the ordinance. And they're variances, or they are waivers on file for the development plan, which this body will hear next month.
If I could, so then we're basically looking at a zoning request to forward a recommendation to town council with a zoning request that we can get commitments or ask for commitments at
Right.
that time, which is what I see that the staff has provided us to include instead of, if we don't do these, then we'll have to consider the waiver. If I understand it right, if we read these commitments into zoning decision, and they're part of a favorable approval with the commitments, and the town council accepts that, then the petitioner has to abide by those commitments.
Right.
Is that correct?
They would, yeah.
So if we don't read these in here, then we'll have to consider a waiver request, or can they ask for a waiver against these commitments? That's what I'd like to know.
Right, no, they couldn't. They couldn't ask for a waiver of these commitments. These would be rezoning commitments, and their only relief is to seek a modification of those commitments.
Okay.
And I don't know if that's really,
Well,
Ronald Reagan is one of our significant corridors through Avon, and to look at a lesser development, I mean, one, we're looking for something that's, it's attractive, brings people into Avon. I understand about price point, but you're talking about a major corridor into Avon where we look for
Right.
following the ordinance there. And I'm hesitant to think that we would lessen the ordinances to meet your request. I don't understand the 11-foot overhang issue with that, because if 11 inches overhang, because if your forklift's going to hit that, how are they going to get in the garage door?
exactly.
So why I can't see the 11-inch overhang being in the way, because your garage door is not all the way up to the top of your wall. So I'm having a hard time following your logic.
The mask is that high. Well, DRG, in my opinion, is not going to be as attractive as we are. That's just concrete, gray sticking up, and that's right across the street from us. I think stone, brick, wood, glass, and an awning is much more attractive than a salt blocks, is what they call them on the street. So I think we are aware that we want it attractive for Avon and for our tenants. Our tenants want something nice looking. And if you look at our website and you see Noblesville, they look very attractive and they look just like this.
What's your website?
risecommercialdistrict.com.
Is your development in Noblesville on a major corridor in Noblesville?
Yes, it is. It's on Highway 38, coming out of downtown, right next to the hospital. Previously,
Like that?
yes. Previously,
Okay, I hear you.
Okay,
'Cause I wanna
previously,
check it out. So-
I think some of this is from Mr. Peoples was at Greenwood, and the buildings were brown and they were just more of a barn shape. He's right. So we have stepped it up the last 4 years and developed the flat, different heights on the buildings. But we're asking for not to put the stone in the back because nobody's going to see it and our tenants don't care, and they care about their rent factors. So I know you brought up that that's not important. To us, it's very important. This is a $10 million investment in your city. It's going to employ 425 to 450 hands-on employees, and it brings 125 businesses to the district.
I'd like to, if we can, go ahead and wrap this up. Do we have any other questions with regards to the zoning? And I understand that
Right.
that we have the commitments, we have the zoning, and where do the two?
I just want to be sure we've filed for the waivers. So whether you hear them tonight or in a month, we're assuming you need to hear them next month for the stone and for the because they're on file. So I just want to be sure that you're going to hear them, or the planning commission will hear them next at the end of March.
Mitchell, the waivers that are in the commitments will be heard next month, correct?
So yeah, there is a development plan review petition on file. And the petitioner has requested waivers of the architectural standards at that DPR petition.
So does it make any difference? I'm just trying to determine whether or not we need to be discussing these commitments tonight. The determination as to whether or not those waivers will be granted will be
Well,
decided
the
at
only
another
reason you would
time.
need to discuss the commitments is if you're going to forward them to the plan or the town council for incorporation into the ordinance. If you don't intend to, then no, you don't necessarily have to.
Also throw in, that, just to make sure that everyone's clear, is when we say commitment, this is what the petitioner is willing to give over. I don't want to confuse commitments with conditions. Conditions are what we approve and then base that off of. So we could say we approve, or we're going to forward a recommendation for approval based off of these conditions. And that's what will go to the town council. That's what we're imposing on them when they're not agreeing to. And what we have in our staff report is we're requesting these commitments. And the staff report doesn't address to, well, what happens to our determination and our considerations if those commitments aren't made, which is seemingly is going before you tonight. They're not going to be made except for the 35-foot right away. And then it's going to default back to just our standards and ordinances and the DPR process. Now, one reason why plan commissions consider commitments at this level is because rezones are discretionary. And so we have a little bit more wiggle room. Now, if the commitments aren't made and conditions aren't approved, then it's going to go to the DPR stage, which is ministerial, as you recall. So there the question is, do the standards meet our ordinances? And if the answer is yes, then you must approve it. They don't have any discretion at that point. So when we look to commitments at this stage, we're trying to get that kind of resolved on the front end of the process where we have some discretionary actions to take.
What would be the difference between putting commitments into this approval versus conditions? Is that something the planning commission can do, or is that something that has to come from the town council?
Yes, she would forward a recommendation that they, approve the petition with the following conditions, 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's not what they're agreeing to. And in this case, if I would not recommend making these conditions if they're not willing to make them as commitments, because we have some language that is retroactively applying to things that have already been approved. So in that instance, I would say you should not make it a condition and take it into your overall consideration and your discretion of whether you're going to forward a positive or negative rec.
Because we still have to hear their arguments next month on the waivers.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
So Mr. Sapp, if we don't give you the 2 acres you were asking for, if we go back to the basics of tonight, if we don't give you the 2 acres that you want to rezone, well, how's that impact your project?
Huge. We probably won't come.
I'm sorry?
We'll probably cancel the project. It's too much cost. Without those 2 acres, we can't get the elevations we need to make the property flat, because there's basically 2 small creeks running through it, and they're now called the waters of the USA. So we need those 2 acres to expand a little and flatten the site out. Mr. Banning's here that helped us with the drawings. So it'll be very difficult to make it without your approval and those 2 acres rezoned. So I kindly asked you for your 2 acre for the rezoning approval, and I'll be back next month.
Do we have any public comments on the matter? Is there anybody in the audience who would like to speak on the matter? Thank you. If you can please come forward, state your name and address.
James Hutchek, 2342 Fisher Avenue, Speedway, Indiana, 46224. We've owned the property I've owned my piece of property for over 30 years. My father's here is over 50 years. This is, politics are always wonderful, right? So when we brought this project, its birth, the waterway laws were different. They got changed back when Biden became president. So it went from navigable to non-navigable back to they keep flip-flopping them. So they're in trouble because there's a little field tile that now is called a creek that went horribly wrong in the last 50 years. That's not even being used anymore because when Ronald Reagan went through, the field got cut off, not to mention the fields are now industrial sites. So it's kind of like going back and forth. The project originally looked like it would work just fine for them. I feel their pain because now they're struggling to flatten everything out, make sure that they meet the DNR codes for all the creeks and all the other little waterways that run through it. The neighbors, there's not been a single objection from any neighbor about this project. You've not had anyone come in here and complain. You've not had anyone come in here and throw a fit. Everybody's for the development because there's not anything that's going to harm the neighborhoods and even the people that are on the other side of the road there are willing to sell their 1 acre, from the creek line back. So I guess, I understand the arguments over fascias and all the other fun stuff, but in reality, from what I've always understood, this project actually meets what you guys really want. You want development that's actually going to bring business to Avon. You want something that's going to give you guys credibility as far as economics versus just housing. And to me, I think this is a perfect project for this, considering that you've got all the warehouses being built across the street and you've got all the other land that's just down from us that's probably going to be developed the same exact way. Just my opinion, but you have all that farmland that's going to go, it's already in the commercial. You've already been in negotiations with putting a road from, right through it. I just see this as a perfect piece to finish off what you guys are wanting to do in the first place. Just my opinion.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on the matter? Discussion.
I think it's a really neat project. I think it's a really interesting business model. I think it is a good, a fit for that corridor. But for me, the one big hurdle is, again, the request to deviate from our standards. And, there are reasons to deviate from it. Unfortunately, cost is not a reason to deviate from it, that it would be more affordable for the developer if they could deviate from it. So again, really neat project. I think it's a good fit for the area, but not the rationale provided for not, putting forth those commitments just fell short for me.
I'd agree. I think it's a good development as far as what we're considering here, the zoning request. I think as staff has indicated that we should forward a favorable recommendation to town council for the zoning change. And I say we ought to just go with the first commitment and listen to the waivers when DPR comes in front of us, because the petition has already indicated that they would agree to the 35-foot half right of way on County Road 1050. So go with that commitment, and then let's listen to the waivers when they come with the DPR.
My only thought is the property to the north of this is for sale. The property to the south of this is for sale. And what we put in the middle, I think is going to determine what goes to the north and to the south of this property. And Ronald Reagan is supposedly our jewel. We spent millions and millions of dollars to put this road together. And I don't think it fits. I agree with you, Mason. It's a good business idea, but not on Ronald Reagan. I just don't think that's the right place for it.
So that development's already approved, though. We're just adding, rezoning 2 more acres. Now, they did indicate if they can't get the 2 acres, they'd walk away.
There you go.
But that development has been approved.
I think it's actually a very good fit for Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan is not a corridor that's lined with, estate homes. It is meant to be a business corridor. And I think, I love this business model. It's unique. I think it is something that, especially with people going back into being self-employed and working from home, and you suddenly discover that your kid's extra bedroom really isn't great for having Zoom calls and that kind of thing. Having this kind of option available to small businesses I love this idea. I like your idea of just going with the first commitment, since the petitioners have agreed to that. And that's the whole point of a commitment, is that they've agreed to that. And then perhaps let's hear what they have to say on 2 and 3. Bill, would that throw a monkey wrench in the works in any way?
No, not at all.
Mitchell?
I would agree with Mr. Guckenberger's comments 100%, and with you that we could approve as suggested by staff to approve the motion with the one commitment.
Mr. Kaufman, you have any comments? Brand new to the board, jump in with both feet?
I agree. I do have a little bit more of an issue with not following the architectural standards, the guidelines, even compromise was proposed.
So if there's no further discussion, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion. I move that we forward ZA 22-01 Rise Development Rezoning to a request to rezone 2 acres from AG to R1 and to rezone 2 acres from AG to I2 to the Town Council with a favorable recommendation, subject to the following commitment. A 35-foot half right-of-way shall be dedicated along County Road 1050 East.
Any questions on the motion? Ian?
Need a second.
Oh, do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a second. Any questions on the motion? Okay, Ian?
Catherine Ramsberg,
4.
Paul Guckenberger,
4.
Dave Kaufman,
4.
Mason Pike,
4.
Ed Rosenbaum,
Against.
Harold Heiser.
Okay, next on our agenda is MAP 2201 Rise Development Request for Approval of a Preliminary Major Subdivision Plat to create a 6-lot major industrial subdivision project for a co-warehousing facility space.
Oops, there we go. All right, so the request is a little, that discussion came, description was, I think, the last month. Is that on your agenda?
I'm sorry.
It should be a request for approval for a preliminary major subdivision to divide the acreage into a lot for industrial development and 2 1-acre lots for continued residential occupancy.
That's not what I'm looking at.
Okay, yeah, that's map P 2201 Rise Development, a request for approval of a preliminary major subdivision
Right.
to subdivide 16.38 acres into 1 14.38 acre lot for industrial development and 2 1-acre lots for continued residential occupancy. This is sort of a sequel to the previous discussion.
Looks like I have 2 different agendas.
You might have last month's agenda. on there.
No, it's got the same date, but maybe it is. Well, anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, there was some confusion on that plat when it was originally filed because of the way it was filed, and even now it's not entirely clear the acreage on it. I mean, we have a legal description showing the acreage. The acreage, though, changes a little bit based on the drawings. So based on the drawings, this is a request to subdivide a 15.985 acres into 3 lots. The petition was submitted with 16.38 acres. I believe the discrepancy between the two changes is the amount of right-of-way that's going to be dedicated with this development when the plat is finally recorded. As you just heard, there was the zoning map amendment petition pending before the Plan Commission that would require rezoning a portion of this plat to R1 and a portion of this plat to I2. So the approval of this plat should be conditioned upon final approval of those zone map amendments by the town council. If the town council chooses not to approve those zone map amendments, the plat honestly can't be approved because the non-conforming lots would increase the non-conformity. The request as proposed is consistent with the requirements of the zoning ordinance, the subdivision control ordinance, and any conditions of any previous approvals, provided the town council does approve the pending rezoning that you forwarded at the last minute, at the last hearing. This is the history of the site, the three development proposals that the Plan Commission, well, two that the Plan Commission has heard already. The DPR, it will be scheduled for the next month's meeting. This is the layout of the plat. So this shows the plat. Right away be dedicated around here, right away dedicated right around here as well. Well, actually, there's no right of way necessary for Ronald Reagan. We have all the right of way we need, but right of way would be dedicated like a right around here for 1050 East. So the discrepancies between the acreages of the various documents, the petition face, and the acreage for the lots, I believe, is accommodated by the right-of-way dedication along 1050. We do recommend approval of the plat. We do recommend approval of this plat, subject to the same conditions that we normally put on most plats, that revised plans comply with all commitments and conditions, that the project receive any necessary review and approval through Crossroads Engineering on behalf of the town and Hendricks County HCSO and the Hendricks County Surveyor's Office and the Drainage Board, and that the final plat will comply with all relevant portions of the subdivision control ordinance and the town code. We are adding one additional condition on this approval, and that condition stems from the fact that we do have a zoning amendment pending on it. And so we would make this plat, that the plat approval shall only be considered final when the town council approves ZA 2201, which is the zoning amendment that you forwarded just about 5 minutes ago. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I stand ready to answer your questions.
Okay, I'm confused. This is the same property we just talked about, right?
It is, yeah.
It's something of a clerical thing on the amount of acres? That's what we're having to correct? Is that?
No. What it is the petition face. So to give you a rundown on this petition has been difficult from the beginning. It's filed on the petition as a 16.38 acre parcel.
Right.
But when you subdivide it, when the subdivision is shown, could you put that back up?
It doesn't add up to the 16.
It doesn't add up to the
You're trying to make it
16.38
so
acres.
consistent.
Yeah, it adds up to 15.985 acres when you add up the
Okay.
stated acreage of this lot and then these two 1 acre lots. It ends up not equaling the same acreage that's shown on the petition face.
So it's trying to clean
And
that
I
up.
believe that discrepancy is the serves as two purposes. One, consolidating lots, because this is about an 8 acre. There are 8 distinct parcels right now currently in this development. So you would consolidate 6 of those into one parcel, but then you'd add the 2 acres from the 1 acre lots.
Okay.
Right. And then that you would subdivide those two-acre lots into 1-acre lots for continued residential occupancy.
Okay.
And yeah, it's confusing, but the ultimate end state is you have 2 1-acre lots for prettiness. I'm the right guy for that.
Okay. Questions for staff? Okay, ask the petitioner to come forward.
Jim Sapp, 8070 Castleton Road, and Jeremy Haynes on Castleton Road, Indianapolis, Indiana.
Kind of in the middle.
Correct.
Okay.
Really, the big variable is easements. And we met with Crossroads today. We have to do stormwater detention. So the sites have gotten bigger because of these little creeks and stormwater detention. So we're holding our water, just like DRG's holding their water and putting it into the stream slowly and cleaning it. So that's why the properties are getting bigger.
Any other questions for the petitioner? Okay, I think we drained you dry the last time. So- Okay, thank you. Are there any public comments on the project? Is there anybody in the audience who'd like to speak on the project? Discussion?
I'll make a motion. I make a motion that we approve MAPP 22-01 Rise Development request to subdivide 16.38 acres into one 14.3 acre lot for this industrial redevelopment and 2 1-acre lots for continued residency occupancy, subject to the following conditions. 1, plat approval should only be considered final when the town council approves ZA 22-01. Since the subdivision of this property into 2 residential lots can only be accomplished if those lots are zoned R1. 2, any revised plans must comply with all commitments and conditions noted as part of any approval granted. 3, the project receives any necessary review and approval by Crossroads Engineering on behalf of the town, HCSO, and HC Drainage Board. And 4, the final plat will comply with all the relevant portions of the subdivision control ordinance and the town code.
Mr. Peoples, did you say there was an additional condition or is this? He said it. He said it, okay. Okay, very good. Discussion on the motion, or is there a second?
I'll second.
Is there discussion on the motion? Okay. Let's take a vote.
Captain Edwards,
4?
Paul Gutenberg,
4.
Dave Goffin,
4.
Jason White,
4.
Ed Rosenbaum,
4.
Harold Heiser.
Okay. Moving on, our next agenda item is ZA 22-2, Village of Turner Trace, Section 5. Request for approval of a zoning amendment to modify commitments associated with ZA 0704, eliminating commitment made which limited the use of the property to church uses. Is that correct?
That's the one.
All right.
As you indicated, this is a request to delete a commitment associated with a rezoning case that was done in 2007. In 2007, a portion of Turner Trace was rezoned to allow for church. At that time, the Plan Commission imposed a commitment to that rezoning, and that commitment stated that the property could only be used for churches. The church has since not located at this site and not going to pursue the construction of a church on this property. Therefore, we're asking, or single-family residential use, which would be consistent with the balance of Turner Trace in the vicinity of this request, seems to be the more prudent act here. So we do recommend approval of the request straight up. Why is this not going? There we go. So extensive land use history associated with this. I won't get into it on this development. And this shows you, so originally, this is actually a subsequent case that you'll actually hear, but this is the conceptual layout right now of the residential portion of this. The area that we're really talking about is like right about here. So it's this area right here. This is just this, you'll see this in the next case, but this area right here was rezoned for a church. And that commitment was put on there. They simply need to strip off that commitment so they can build this. We do recommend approval of the request. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Is this at the corner of 150 and Avon Avenue? Is it that large field there?
No, that's a commercial portion of.
So this is inside development itself?
It is. It's in the southeast corner of Turner Trace. So you'd have to drive through Turner Trace to get to this lot. Yeah.
And what's the zoning to make it for church purposes? Was that like a special request? And then the church pulled out, and so we're just going back to residential?
Essentially going back to what was previous. So originally this was single family residential lots. And then the church purchased it to build a church on here and changed that. And now we're changing it back to the way it was essentially in the 2000s.
Okay. Questions for staff?
So does the church own the property or does the developer still own the property?
I believe the developer has entered into an option to purchase the property, awaiting the approval of appropriate zoning entitlements.
Okay. If the petitioner would like to come forward. Please state your name and address.
Good evening, Tony Bagata with Lennar Homes of Indiana. Address is 11555 North Meridian Street, Suite 400 in Carmel. Bill pretty much explained it. The zoning for Village of Turner Trace was put in 97, so we are looking to bring this project to a close. We've been building there for several years now. We're currently under construction in Section 4. We are in negotiations with the church to buy the property if the zoning commitment is removed, and then the primary plat, which follows next for Section 5, is approved. We would move forward with purchasing as long as we work out through some of the utilities. I'm available for any questions.
Will this build out be similar to the other properties, the other homes that are in that?
Yes, correct.
So it's not anything different. It's just a continuation of what
we're already building.
What originally gone there, and then it wasn't because of the church, but now it's going to go back there.
Yeah, it's currently going to match the homes we're building today that you see in
Okay.
under construction.
Any further questions for petitioner? Okay, thank you. Anybody signed up for public comments? Anybody in the audience who wish to have public comments? Okay, discussion?
I'd say this is pretty straightforward. I agree with the staff's recommendation that we should approve the request.
And we should always have discussion. I agree. I think that makes absolute sense. This is a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. If there's no more discussion, do we hear a motion?
I'll move to approve that we approve ZA 22-02, Village of Turner Trace, Section 5, a request for a zoning amendment to modify commitments associated with ZA 07-04, limited commitment made which limited the use of the property to church uses.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion on the motion? Let's take a vote.
Stefan Randberg,
4.
Paul Gutenberg,
4.
Dave Kaufman,
4.
Jason Pike. 4. Ed Rosenbaum,
4.
Harold Iser. 4. Motion carries.
Next, we have MAP 2202, also Village of Turner Trace, Section 5, request for approval of a major subdivision primary plat, subdividing 8.808 acres into 19 lots for single-family residential occupancy.
So this is a follow-up to the previous petition. The previous petition eliminated church use as the only use for the property. And this is a primary plat of this property and a replat of a small section of Section 4 to allow for a single-family residential development. That's 8.08 acres into 19 single-family lots. This property is dual zoned. It's R2 and R4 as a result of a 1997 zoning request. This is the land use history of this. As you can tell, a whole number of petitions. And the question, of course, is you have to ask yourself, why so many petitions? And I believe the reason is, but in 1997, there was no planned unit development. So what was done in 1997 to create this development was straight zoning and then a series of special exceptions and variances that have sort of echoed in time, as you were. So it's a straight zoning with a number of variances. It serves almost exactly the same purpose as a planned unit development does right now. The request, as I said, would serve as a modification of Section 4 in addition to platting a Section 5. In that particular section, I'll switch to over here to the diagram. There is, in Section 4, there is, so this is a cul-de-sac right here. And there is a public street that would come in here and connect right here in Section 4. What this particular petition does is eliminate this connection and then substitute it for this connection down here. It changes this particular public street in Section 4, creates a little extra common area for this lot or this common area lot, and then has section lot 219 in it for additional building. But the remainder down here, it's actually probably right here. This is the new quote unquote section of the property, and it would be a zoning roughly 2 and a fraction units per acre. It's consistent with the requirements of the zoning ordinance as modified by the special exception that was done in 1997 and the two variances that relate to platting. Those two variances, well, not to try to get into the weeds on this one, but back in 97, a development, a single family development in the R4 district required a special exception. And so that special exception allows you to put single family residential development in the R4 portions of this development. And then the variances applied to this, which allowed the narrower lots, 65 feet of public street frontage, and also have a shorter setback. As I said, the proposed plat is consistent with the standards of the zoning ordinance and the subdivision control ordinance as they were modified by the 1997 special exception and variances that were approved on this development. And the development proposal will be consistent with the development that has already occurred within Turner Trace over the preceding 25 or 30 years. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Are there any significant differences between what's being proposed for this land, for this acreage versus what is already there?
No. Well, what's already there is vacant land. So yeah, I mean, you're looking at single family lots,
meant
but you're
the
talking about the
the
balance of
surrounding.
Turner Trace.
Right.
No, there's no differences between what's already being constructed in Turner Trace and what they're proposing for this lot,
Okay.
these lots.
No issues with potential school bus turnarounds or anything like that?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
All right,
No.
thanks.
Any further questions for staff? No further questions. Have the petitioner come forward, please. And please state your name and address.
Good evening, Kyle Icorn with HWC Engineering, 135 North Pennsylvania Street, Suite 2800, Indianapolis. Bill did a good job of summarizing the request here to kind of close out the southeast corner of Turner Trace, and you know, the lots and all that are consistent with the rest of the development. And yeah, we just request your approval of the plat.
Questions for the petitioner?
Mr. Eichelon, I drove through Turner Trace. I hadn't driven through it. I've lived here for 25 years and never driven. It's a really nice development. You guys are doing a really nice job. Appreciate the houses. They look different.
Yeah, it's a unique.
It's very good. Did
Yeah.
good job. I'm going to add, Mr. Pike brought up a good point, though. I saw a 90-degree turn in the part you want to do. Are school buses going through this subdivision?
Yeah, well, and so the inside of those turns does have a radius. And so those corners we're putting in, you know, they have a radius where a vehicle can turn.
We just had the school corporation transportation director be in a meeting last 1 month or 2 months ago. And he just said sometimes when cars are parked on the roads, it's almost impossible for the buses to get through. It's a real problem. So I just want to bring that to your attention. Do with it what you want, but it is an important consideration as you look at that, particularly that right turn that you have in the middle of that subdivision. Thank you.
Any other questions for the petitioner? Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Are there any public comments?
Nobody signed up.
Is there anybody in the audience who'd care to comment on this matter? If not, we'll open it to commission discussion.
I was just going to say, as far as with the zoning change here, this looks like a good continuation of the build out of that development and is consistent with what they've been doing.
Yeah, I would just echo that. It's nice to see that the development's finally picking up, and I know it's sat dormant for a while, for a number of years, and so it's nice to see some activity again.
Agree.
Is there any further discussion? If we have no further discussion, do we hear a motion?
I move that we approve MAP P 2202, Village of Turner Trace, Section 5. Request for approval of a major subdivision primary plat subdividing 8.808 acres into 19 lots for single-family residential occupancy, subject to the following conditions. Number one, the commitment modifications eliminating the requirement that this property be used for a church shall be reported prior to final plat approval. Number two, any revised plans must comply with all commitments and conditions noted as part of the granted. Number three, the project receives any necessary review and approval by Crossroads Engineering on behalf of the town, HCSO, and the engineering board. And number four, the final plat will comply with all the relevant portions of the subdivision control ordinance and the town code.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? If there is no discussion, let's take a vote.
Catherine Ransberg,
4.
Paul Gutenberger,
4.
Dave Kaufman,
4.
Jason Pike,
4.
Ed Rosenbaum,
4.
Harold Heiser. 4.
Very good. Moving on to our next agenda item. We have MAP A 2203, Avon Logistics Lot 2, request for approval of a major subdivision plat amendment with one lot on 66.96 acre lot with new easements. Does that sound correct to you, Mr. People?
That is correct. And hopefully I don't jinx things by saying this is probably going to be the easiest one we have tonight.
Wow.
We'll determine that.
Oh, he just said I shouldn't have said that. This is a request for an amended subdivision plat to reestablish Lot 2 within Avon Logistics Industrial Subdivision. The lot is identical to that approved in map P. Doohickey up there. That approved in map F 2103, which is the secondary plat of it, of this planned unit development. Essentially, all this request does is establish new easements and then rename it from Block B to Lot 2. So the easiest way to review this one is simply look at the two side by side. As you can see, the two lots are identical in size, identical in shape. And the only real thing they're doing is one, the approval had it as a block and now it's being changed to a lot. And you're establishing some easements along the side here that weren't here. And then there's some additional easements down here for some infrastructure that. Other than that, this is, it is identical to what's already been approved and recorded. And they're just amending this to include the easements and changing the name. We do recommend approval. We recommend approval subject to the 3 standard conditions we have on any plat. And we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
So this is a name change and an easement, a right of way, if you will, acknowledgement.
Well, it's just changing. It's just putting additional easements on this lot and changing it from Block B to Lot 1, Block B to Lot 2. That's really all this amendment does.
Kind of like getting married.
And this is between 100 South and the railroads, right, on new part?
It is, right. It's the westernmost parcel in the Avon Logistics Industrial Subdivision.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? If we don't have any other questions for staff, will the petitioner come forward?
Good evening, Jeff Banning, Banning Engineering, 853 Columbia Road, Suite 100 in Plainfield. Also have the developer here, direct from Salt Lake City, Luke Rothy with Chicago Industrial. I think Bill's pretty well spelled this out. This was all platted originally as the overall development. We're just coming in to amend the plat to fit the new 1 million square foot building we're going to talk about here next. Any questions?
Questions for petitioner? If there are no questions, we'll take public comments. Anybody signed up for public comments? Deborah Ann Tolan.
I live next door to that.
Could you please state your name and address?
Deborah Tolan, 8540 East, County Road 100 South. I live right next door. They've been putting blue tape around. One of the things they've tied that tape to is an existing bat house. That is against DNR regulations to destroy or bother in any way. And it looks like they're planning on putting their drainage right through the bat house.
Are you saying a B-A-T, a bat house?
Bat house, an existing little brown bat house.
Is that something you put up or?
We did, but now it is part of, it's an endangered species.
Is it on your property?
No.
Thank you.
But there are state laws that say that you cannot tear any bat house down.
Hi, I'm Michael Ann. I live at the house too.
What is your, and that, could you just say your name, full name and address, please?
Michael Ann Tolan, 8540 East County Road, 100 South, Avon, Indiana, 46123.
Thank you.
Sorry, she's
That's
getting a
okay.
little flustered. I believe this is for the next part and regarding like the water and everything.
Okay.
I do have a question regarding the easement. Is the easement getting smaller or is it getting bigger?
This is just an opportunity for you to make your statement. I don't think we take questions right now,
Okay.
but we can certainly raise, since you've brought that up, we can certainly raise it with the petitioner or with staff. Like we're bringing it up.
Yeah. There it is. So this is what is recorded. There are no easements here or here, and there are just a few easements down here. Actually, I think there is an easement here for landscaping. So that those easements are staying. The only thing that's being added is additional drainage easements here, some easements for different infrastructure improvements here, and then additional drainage easements on this side. So the easements are actually getting larger on this site. There's more easements being affixed to this or being encumbered on the site than what is currently on there.
Okay.
Okay. I think the next thing, the bat house is for the next one.
Okay.
But the easement is supposed to be for Burnett Woods. Because
Supposed to be
we
for
went to
what?
the
I'm
last
sorry.
meeting.
Supposed to be for what?
It's supposed to be for Burnett Woods, the protected forest. And so that's what the west easement is supposed to be for.
To protect the woods? Is that what you mean? Mhm. So Bills, where's their house at and where's the woods on this picture?
So I believe their house, oops. I believe the house that we're talking about is like right down here.
Isn't, yes.
And then the woods is to the
And
north
then
of
there's a
that.
wooded area
Yeah.
right
Mhm.
up here, right? And there's a landscape easement right through here.
Okay, thank you.
And it's the same size.
Okay.
Okay, that's
Thank
all I
you.
have.
Any further public comments? If there are no further public comments, discussion.
So I do have a question, just to make sure. So the consideration of the bat house and the brown bats, is that something that we would look at as part of the DPR then? And not part of the,
It's not in our zoning or subdivision control ordinance. That would be a state requirement to enforce.
so that's something where, that's where, and there's an agency that would take care of that.
Yeah, it's the state. The state Department of Natural Resources, I believe, would be the agency that takes care of endangered species.
Okay. And then the easement, additional easement, then in addition to the landscape easement along Burnett Woods, just within, further into the development, and there's an easement for drainage. Is that what you said?
Yeah, there's a landscape easement along that house. So the part of the plan unit development had additional landscaping along the lot that's down there on the southwest, or it's actually, yeah, the southwest part of this development here. But the rest of it is, like she said, it's Burnett Woods. It's a heavily wooded area. There's no real, other than the standard easement for that, there's no additional easement required for Burnett Woods in the plan unit development ordinance. It really is enhanced landscaping along that existing single-family residential
There's
lot.
no infringement on Burnett Woods.
No, Burnett Woods is going to remain, this property doesn't even incorporate Burnett Woods.
No removal of trees or anything like that for the easement?
No, it's
right?
all farm field.
That's what I thought.
Mitchell, is there any obligation on the part of the town of Avon with regards to any DNR?
I don't think we have any. There's no reporting requirements from the town's perspective. I'm not sure if the petitioner has any idea of that issue and has addressed that concern, but
Well, he has conveniently walked to the podium.
I figured
believe
it
to
was time
address
for me to chime in a little bit, just to give a little history, because I think, Paul, I don't think you were here for the rezoning of this, and Catherine, I think you were maybe towards the end. So just so everyone knows, the easement on the Burnett Woods side of the property was actually part of the commitment for the PUD. And that was to actually help enhance and retain the existing trees that are there that were worth retaining and enhancing. We will hear more about that in the next petition. The other thing that we did as part of that project is we had an 80-foot buffer around the Tolan household when we went through that process as well, and then enhanced landscaping and buffering there as well. We've hired an environmental consultant being up against Burnett Woods. This, once again, will come out in the next petition. We had to do some creative drainage on that west side so that we don't dry up the waterways that run through Burnett Woods, so that we don't impact the trees through there. We've actually worked with Central Indiana Land Trust, who is the caretaker of that property. So we've been very, very diligent in taking care of those environmental issues. And that's been a goal all along.
Okay, and I'm sure we'll hear more about it on the next agenda item.
Yes.
Okay.
And just to add on to that, the decision you're making tonight on this particular piece and the next piece will not have any impact on the conditions and commitments on the PUD. Those will all still be in place.
Okay. So is there any further discussion? We have no more public comments. Is that correct? Discussion? Okay. Do we have any discussion? This is pretty straightforward, I think.
Well, it wasn't as easy as Bill thought it was.
Shouldn't
Bad houses and all kinds of
have
things
spoken
coming
up. If there's no further discussion, do we have a motion?
I would move that we approve MAPA 22-03.
Is your
Avon,
microphone on?
Yeah.
Okay,
I think.
just want to make sure.
I get it down where maybe you can hear me better. Anyway, lot 2, a request for approval of an amendment to a major subdivision primary plat with one lot on 66.96 acre lot with new easements, subject to the following conditions. 1, any revised plans must comply with all commitments and conditions noted as part of any approval granted. The project receives any necessary review and approval by Crossroads Engineering on behalf of the town, HCSO, and HC Drainage Board. And item 3, the final plat will comply with all the relevant portions of the subdivision control ordinance and the town code.
We have a second?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? If there's no further discussion, let's take a vote.
Catherine Ransford,
4.
Paul Gutenberg,
4.
Dave Kaufman,
4.
Jason Pike,
4.
Ed Rosenbaum,
4.
Carol Kaiser.
4.
Okay, we are zipping right along. This makes me happy. Next on the agenda is DPR 2201 Avon Logistics Lot 2, request for approval of a development plan review for 1,009,000 square feet speculative warehouse with accommodating employee parking, truck docks, and drainage ponds.
As you indicated, this is a request for approval for a development plan, and that is to construct approximately 1,009,000 square foot building for industrial development on this property. We did review this request for compliance. The history on this property, pretty straightforward, all within the last couple of years. The Avon Logistics Plan Unit Development and one amendment to that plan unit development, and then the primary and final plats for this. And of course, the previous petition then adds to that history with a plat amendment on this particular lot. We have reviewed this. The review is consistent with the requirements of the Avon Logistics Planned Unit Development. It is consistent with the requirements of the Signature Streets overlay and with chapters 15, 16, 18, and of the zoning ordinance. As amended by the Avon Logistics Plan Unit Development, it's consistent with the subdivision control ordinance and with the comprehensive plan recommendation for this area. Going through just quickly through some of the slides here, this is the layout of the building straight up without showing you as it gets, it'll become a little bit more cluttered when we start adding the landscape elements and other sorts of things, at least from an appearance standpoint. And this is that. When you start adding the contour lines for the drainage facilities and the landscaping elements into it, this is what it would look like with at full development with the landscaping and everything else installed. Elevations there, this is within, these elevations are consistent with the requirements of the Avon Landing Plan Unit Development. So we do recommend approval of this development plan review. And we do make that subject to the 3 standard conditions that we have on every development plan review, that the revised plans comply with the commitments and conditions as noted of any part of any approval granted, that there'll be a landscape bond required as per section 4.9 of the zoning ordinance, and then the development shall comply with all relevant portions of the town code and comments by Public Works, the fire department, Crossroads engineers at the pre-construction meeting. Again, we do recommend approval, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Questions for staff? Is this the development, or how would you compare this to the development that is currently being built on 100 South?
It's part of the same development.
This
So
is
it's-
part of that same
yeah.
development? Okay. I
It's a-
wasn't sure looking at the map.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, the lot that's under development is joining this lot, right? It's right to the east of this lot.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, this is the lot. This is just a continuation of the same development.
Okay. Okay. This is the easternmost section of that development
Westernmost.
or westernmost?
Yeah,
Okay.
westernmost lot on, this is the one that's adjacent to Burnett Woods and that single-family residential lot.
Got it.
So
Okay.
it's going to look very similar to the one that's already there.
Yes.
Additional questions for staff? Petitioner would like to come forward?
Good evening again. For the record, Jeff Banning with Banning Engineering. So this is actually pretty exciting, our first 1 million square foot building, right? So here again, very consistent to what's being constructed currently out there. Yeah, we've got a couple slides that will help. Oh, thank you. I have to go towards the painting. Excellent. So, oh, and where's is there a clicker? Ah, perfect. Oh, wait, it does the same thing. So, 1 million square foot building, CSX up here, County Road 100 South here. This is the west flanking roundabout. The building under construction is right here, just to get everybody. North is, of course, this way. Burnett Woods sits over here. That's what we were talking about. One of the things you'll notice here, there's actually a little pond on this property that drains into Burnett Woods. Our environmental consultants and then us going through our drainage design, we've actually continued to not impact that pond to allow the drainage to continue to go through Burnett Woods. So we've, as I'd said previously in the plat portion of this, we have really tried to make this to where we do not impact Burnett Woods. We do screen the tollins as best we can and move forward with the development.
How are you screening, sir? How are you screening?
I'll show you here shortly. Yep, good question. Here's just a quick elevation view of the building. I think probably a lot of this was in your packet. Here's Bill showed that one. Here again, this is some of our landscaping package. Is really kind of difficult to see, but you can see we've got a lot of landscaping here. I've got a lot of trees. What we've done, unlike most developments, is we've gone in, hired a consultant to do native plantings. We're going in, getting rid of all the invasives, trying to really screen that side of the property, so it would blend in with Burnett Woods to protect the Tolans, which their parcel is right here. As I said, we've got an 80-foot buffer all the way around them and then some. Let's see if I can. So here you can kind of see, here's the pond. Burnett Woods sets right here and is to the west. So this would be looking north. So you can see the existing pond, our drainage here. The Tolan property is down. Wait a minute. Yeah. So I'm sorry, I'm backwards. Tolan property is over here. Pond here. Burnett Woods down here. Our building sets here. And then that's just a copy of the plat. So just to give you a sense of what we are doing there on that west line. And I know this was a discussion point when we went through the PUD, but we are actually, to give everyone a sense, we are actually about over 380 feet from the building to our west property line. That's pretty significant. That's over a football field. Our parking, our actual impact from parking to the property line is about 190 feet. So we have a very huge buffer there. And I might add, we also show a trail. I don't know if you can see it, but we've actually included a path around the building to try to incorporate that with the new trail that's part of County Road 100 South. So I believe those were the items I wanted to discuss. I think there's one other point. Greg, I don't believe we got your, Greg Ilko for the record. I don't believe, you want to give your address and all that? I don't believe we got your final drainage letter. I will say that we're asking for 6 waivers, 2 drainage. 4 of them were actually granted in the on the previous building and will likely be required as we move forward on this. We considered them pretty minor. I don't want to speak for staff, but I think they felt like that as well. The other 2 waivers, and I just want to bring this up, really tie into the drainage and how we deal with this and continuing to allow the drainage as best we can to work through Burnett Woods. And that's the only other reason for those other 2 waivers. So wanted to get that in the record if anybody has any questions, if Greg wants to expand on that.
If I may, I will expand on that. So I've been having some internal conversations with staff, both Ryan Cannon and Steve Moore. And so those back and forth have kind of delayed the response to them, but we are working out the discussions with the waiver requests. The waiver requests are not under the purview of the Plan Commission. They're on the Stormwater Board and Steve's decision. So that's where we're at. The standard condition that we have as far as meeting the comments that Crossroad Engineers makes will cover us on this. So there's no reason that we would need to hold up DPR approval from your standpoint as long as that condition is made.
Okay. Questions for the petitioner?
How many trees are you adding?
Oh my gosh.
Looks like a lot.
A lot. I honestly, it probably shows on that one slide, but I couldn't tell you. It is a lot.
200 to 300, looks like maybe.
Oh, probably.
I think that's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah. Well, Avon's a tree city, right? I mean, so, given where we're at and just that corridor there, the developer's been very receptive to doing that. They want to have a really nice development here and it's starting out well.
And are these trees that are, this particular lot is a little different from the other sections that you have developed because it does butt up against the Burnett Woods, which we want to protect. So
Right.
I'm assuming that those trees are designed to be complementary and cooperative with the other trees?
Yes, very much so. And, going back to the bat issue that was brought up earlier, we're very much aware of that. We're very cognizant of that and working through that. Like I said, these are natives, which you don't tend to get that a lot of times in developments. People just want to plant something that screens the property or what have you. We've been really adamant about trying to blend this into Burnett Woods. And ultimately, there's going to be a town park then west of that as well, right? So there'll be a nice, natural feature all the way over to Dan Jones Road.
So you just brought up the bats. Can you talk to us about what is going on or what's the plan to address endangered species?
So it's actually U.S. Fish and Wildlife that deals with the bats. And really, I'm not an expert in that, and I don't want to talk like I'm an expert in that, but typically it's habitat that the bat people look at. And really a lot of it is based on when you can cut down trees and the type of trees. So I guess all I can say per my expertise, we're dealing with that. We're working with the right people to take care of that. So,
okay.
Does that help?
Well, and it's maybe for my education here, is that because you're now aware of it and you've engaged them, are you required to come up with a solution?
So I wasn't particularly aware of what was brought up earlier in regards to that, but it's pretty common in every development. You can only cut down trees at certain times of the year because of the Indiana bat, which is on the endangered species list. So it's pretty standard. You've had a couple projects in front of you today. They're only allowed to cut down trees at certain times from a development standpoint. So we're just following the same rules. With us enhancing that corridor, that will, help habitat.
Okay.
So you are cutting down some trees.
The ones that don't belong there or are not
Don't belong there. What's that mean?
ash trees,
Oh, junk
non-native trees.
Because I thought this was all farm field, so this is not all.
No. There's actually, farmers, they go out and farm the ground, and then over time, their fence rows get larger and larger. Maybe they get lazy, I don't know. But no, there's a fairly significant row of trees on the property. They were identified going through the PUD ordinance. So we've gone through that from a zoning standpoint. We've said which ones we're going to stay, which ones we're going to remove. If we remove some, the ordinances have a requirement on how we replace those. So we're following all those.
So you're just not clear cutting a bunch of trees to put up. You're taking out dead ones that don't, or junk ones that nobody wants.
Junk ones.
You're leaving the nice ones.
Some of them fall within the drainage basin, but for the most part, most of those are not very good trees. They're more scrub trees.
Okay.
A lot of ash trees.
A lot of
It's
those tree
unfortunate.
rows were first planted years and years and years ago as windbreaks.
Yes.
As a result of what happened during the Dust Bowl.
Yes.
So that's a common practice.
Very much so. And we find that, and you'll hear this for probably at least 4 more buildings when we come in front of you. We've got, a tree row effectively all the way around the property. We did a tree survey. We've got, ways to go about mitigating that if we have to take some down. And
So did I hear you that you are actually increasing habitat that is good for the Indiana bat, that would help preserve increasing the size of their habitat in
yes.
that area? Okay.
Well, I think we're going to hear from her, but so this bat house is in a tree that is scheduled to be cut down?
I don't know. I don't know where the bat house is.
Oh, okay.
So I will make this commitment. We will get with the property owner and see where that's at and have a discussion with them.
Thank you. Any further questions for petitioner?
I have one more. You said you were working with Central Indiana Land Trust.
Mhm.
Do they have expertise in bats and their habitats, or does
I-
Fish and Wildlife have to be engaged? How do you get that?
It really becomes gray area. I don't know what their expertise is or is not. I'll be honest with you. It's a federal agency, and the only expertise a lot of times is their agency. We have not contacted them. We have no reason to contact them at this point. It's just basically standard operations.
Now, are you
in-
talking about the Indiana Land
No,
Trust?
no,
or
no, Fish and Wildlife.
Fish and Wildlife, okay.
Indiana Land Trust, we have had several conversations with them.
And what is the role of Indiana Land Trust in this?
They manage Burnett Woods.
Okay, okay.
Okay, so we're trying to protect that, beautiful woods that's in the town now, with our buffers, with our drainage and so forth.
So speaking of drainage, and this has come up frequently, as I'm sure you remember. Can you talk a little bit more about working, the drainage that is going to be going into Burnett Woods? I'm always concerned about when you have aggregate runoff into natural areas. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that kind of goes back to the discussion with the staff letter that we're looking at receiving. But part of the waivers that we're asking for is to allow our release rate, our drainage to continue to go to Burnett Woods. The majority of our drainage actually drains County Road 100 South. But to meet the town ordinance, the letter of the law, if we did that, we would cut all the drainage off that goes to Burnett Woods and drain to an adequate outlet, or what we deem an adequate outlet at County Road 100 South. What we're proposing to do is to continue to allow water to drain to Burnett Woods so that we don't dry up that habitat within the woods.
So this is a preservation of drainage as opposed to adding more drainage.
Correct.
Okay.
So is Burnett Woods owned by the state then? Is that considered state property?
No, it's a nature conservancy.
So who, quote, owns it?
Central Indiana Land Trust.
Is that not a state agency?
No,
No.
Okay.
it's a nonprofit.
You'll find it on the state's DNR website, as places to go hiking and so forth. And you'll find that in many places throughout the state.
Organization that
Right.
protects the woods.
Right.
Any further questions for petitioner? Okay, with that, we'll take public comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
And who do we have signed up to speak? Okay. Welcome back. Just speak, state your name and address again, please.
Michael Antolin, 8540 East County Road, 100 South, Avon, Indiana, 46123. So I guess our first thing is we did go to the meeting that they held on Zoom last spring, I believe, and the bat house was brought up then. And there was a clear indication that that was not going to be removed. So which is one of the reasons why we agreed to zone it a PUD. The other thing is that we haven't seen plans of how the drainage is going to work. And so we've noticed around our house that multiple trees have had blue flags on them, including the bat house tree. And so we don't know if that's considered a tree that has been deemed removed, or if that's a tree that they're wanting to preserve and make sure it's not being taken down. But the main thing is they were very aware for at least a year now, there has been a bat house there. And so since the easement's not being changed, it doesn't affect us. We're more concerned with how it's going to affect wildlife. There's going to be drainage. Is that drainage going to consist of any chemicals that could affect the animal life there? That's the big thing for us, because we've lived there for the past 20 years. And so We enjoy having all the animals that come in the area. We see like dozens of deer that just come into our own yard. And so we're just wanting to make sure that kind of atmosphere is still protected, and how the impact of the construction would affect that, making the trail and everything along with that, because obviously they have to get their vehicles through to make the trail, and it's pretty wooded area that they're talking about. So that was our main concern. And then I have questions for the petitioner at the end.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, I got a question. So did you construct the bat house?
Yes.
Is it something that can be moved?
I don't,
Relocated to Burnett in the woods?
I don't know. I tried contacting the DNR, is it DNR, to find out more.
The land trust.
Well, I tried contacting the Indiana. I didn't know about the land trust. I tried contacting the actual Indiana Wildlife. There's an actual organization to protect the bats in Indiana.
So I assume it's like a wooden box or something that's up in the
Yes.
trees, right?
It was built exactly to the way that they recommend to house bats. And it has a colony of bats every summer.
Okay.
And so,
Well, the developers here, you seem very accommodating to wanting to work with you. So
Yeah.
I suggest you guys get together after the meeting, see if you
Yeah.
can work something out.
And he can connect you with the land trust who, since
Yes.
they own Burnett Woods, perhaps you could all come up with a solution together.
Yeah.
So, okay. Any further public comments? There's no further public comments. We'll close public comments. Discussion.
So just for the record, for the point that was brought up, and Greg, I'd look for you to help us on this, when talking about drainage and the concern about pollution being in the drainage, I mean, that is something that builders need to address, because I think according to our ordinances, we need to make sure that there is no pollution in any drainage. Drainage is clean, acceptable, going back into the waterways. Is
Yeah.
that true?
That's correct. In layman's terms, they're obligated to treat for both quantity and quality, which is identified in the stormwater manual and the stormwater technical standards manual of Hancock County, that we can kind of cross-reference both of those when we review the drainage plans, the hydraulic analysis and that. And so those are the things that we're looking at currently.
Okay. Thank you.
But there's no manufacturing going on in these warehouses, right? I mean, it's just storage and just moving parcels and things.
I'll defer to the petitioner on that one. I have no idea.
I don't believe there's manufacturing. I think this is like warehousing.
Right. So well, go ahead. Yes.
Maybe the petitioner can answer that
Yes,
question.
that'd be good.
There is allowable use for manufacturing as well as warehousing. So it could be any of multiple uses. It's a spec building effectively is what we're building. Don't have an end user. Back to the water quality. We definitely are going to meet the water quality, because we do not want to, like I said, go back. I sound like a broken record. Impact Burnett Woods. So we are going to take care of the water quality for sure.
The only thing I'll add to that is the water quality that we look at from the stormwater is the stormwater water quality. So it's exterior. So you talk manufacturing, production, et cetera. EPA is going to be involved with that kind of thing.
Right. And that would probably, in a lot of ways, play into sanitary sewer more so than stormwater, because we will be taking care of that drainage on our site, the ponds all the way around the site, would take care of the water quality.
Since you brought up ponds, I believe this was brought up in previous meetings, but is there going to be is the aeration for this particular site going to be different from the aeration and mosquito control and that sort of thing that you're going to be having? I mean, that would be a great reason to have bats for one reason. You know.
We're doing on this, as I said before, what we did on the current building under construction, we're doing the same thing on this one.
Okay. Further discussion for the commission? Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, a lot of the hard work on this development happened early on. I think we can all remember those meetings, jumping over some of the harder hurdles. I'm very appreciative of the developers' appreciation for Burnett Woods and its importance to our community, and in trying to incorporate their landscaping and their development so that it's a nice easement into that.
I would echo that.
Is there any further conversation, discussion?
I have a question. Being that the petitioner said that he would commit to working with the landowners, is there any reason to add that to?
Is your microphone on?
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay, okay. Mitchell?
I would not, just because I don't want the town to have to get in the middle of regulating agreements between two other parties.
Okay, that's what I kind of thought, but I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
We always encourage developers to work with their neighbors, and usually they do, so. Any further discussion? If there's no further discussion, then do we have a motion?
Are you going to open the questions?
I don't believe we actually take questions. It's just public comment.
Oh, because you've asked about questions from the audience on the other one. That's why I asked.
I think when you were referring to just comments from the public.
Correct.
Correct, yeah.
Right. We don't take questions from the public. We do, if I said that, I misspoke. It was comments from the public. However, the developer is here, and I would strongly encourage you to speak with him directly, and I would strongly encourage him to stick around and make it a point of having those conversations directly with you. Do I hear a motion?
I move that we approve DPR 22-01 Avon Logistics Lot 2, subject to the following conditions. 1, any revised plans must comply with all commitments and conditions noted as part of any approved grant. 2, a landscape bond is required per section 4-9 of the zoning ordinance. This bond must be provided to the town of Avon prior to the issuance of a full certificate of occupancy for the subject site. And 3, the development shall comply with all relevant portions of town code and comments by Public Works, Fire Department, Crossroad Engineers at the pre-construction meeting.
We have a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? If no further discussion, let's take a vote.
Catherine Ranthor.
4.
Paul Gutenberg.
4.
Dave Gottman. 4. Mason Pike.
4.
Ed Rosenbaum.
4.
Carol Neiser. 4.
Okay. Thank you. And I believe we are down to our last item, which is ZA 2203, Wesleyan Investment Foundation Properties, request for approval of a zoning amendment to 20 acres from single-family residential to multiple-family residential.
As you did indicate, this is a request to rezone about 20 acres from R1 to the R5 zoning district to provide for a two-family residential subdivision. No real history on this property. It's been owned by the church, the foundation associated with the church that is on this property as well. And historically, I believe, has been used for soccer fields. The conceptual plan submitted with this petition shows 31 two-family residential lots, which would allow for the construction of 62 total units. Also shown on the conceptual plan is the retention of the existing religious use on 4 acres of the property, excluding the church acreage from the computation. Therefore, the gross density of this development would be somewhere approximately about 3.88 units an acre. If you include the church property, the density drops down to about 3.1 units an acre. The property is adjacent to single-family residential development to the northeast and southeast. This single-family residential development is Austin Lakes, developed roughly at a density of about 2.5 units an acre. To the south, Waterford Lakes exists. That's a two-family residential community, which is developed at roughly a density of 3.7 units an acre. The future land use map does not have an overt recommendation from this property. And in this instance, the plan does have a few options, extending a cluster map from a nearby district or using the underlying zoning as the appropriate land use recommendation from the plan. In this instance, the plan, the staff has assumed that the plan recommends the land use is at least consistent with the existing zoning. However, the existing zoning is R1. And given the surrounding zoning and the land uses, it's likely that the residential itself is an appropriate land use, though probably at a higher density than what the R1 district would typically allow, which is roughly about 1.8, 1.9 units an acre. This site does have some development constraints. There is a lake on the portion of the property, and that is a stormwater management pond associated with the Austin Lake subdivision. And additionally, there is a street that has been extended through this property, connecting essentially two stub streets within the Austin Lakes development. We couldn't necessarily locate a right-of-way dedication for this particular improvement across this property. Given that the property is an infill site, this shows the property in relation to the town limits and also the existing zoning. So if you'll note down here, this is R5. This is the two-family residential community. This is a portion of Austin Lakes that is within the town zoned, I believe that's R2. And then this is Austin Lakes that's within the unincorporated areas of the town. This is roughly 3.7 units an acre. This is all roughly about 2.5 units an acre. This shows the conceptual layout of the property that's proposed in a rezoning. Obviously conceptual because a lot of the real deep dive into the standards and requirements for this site haven't been done. We're just not at that location in the zoning entitlement process. This was an extension. This is the portion of this would be the existing pond. Obviously the pond they project to expand somewhat to accommodate drainage from this property. The 61 lots are in the center, and then the retention of the religious use up here in the northwest part of the development. Given the fact that the property is an infill site, there's an existing two-family residential development to the south at a comparable density, and that the adjoining single-family residential development already encroaches on this property through the use of the pond and the streets. The development of a two-family residential subdivision on this property, as proposed by the petitioner, does seem a reasonable deviation from the implied recommendation of the plan for a roughly single-family residential development consistent with the existing zoning. So we do recommend approval. The thoroughfare plan does recommend a 120-foot right-of-way along Dan Jones Road, and that would equate to a 60-foot half right-of-way that would need to be dedicated at the time of platting. The bicycle and pedestrian master plan shows the construction of a near-term multi-use path along Dan Jones Road, and the town will actually construct that path when they widen Dan Jones Road. That widening project is probably going to commence sometime in 2024, between 2024 and 2025. So it's more prudent from the town's perspective to receive a restrictive donation for the costs associated with building that trail, rather than have the petitioner build a trail that we're ultimately going to have to remove when we start building Dan Jones Road. So that is the reason for the four commitments that you see up there. a 60-foot half right-of-way dedicated along Dan Jones Road, a restrictive donation for the construction of a multi-use trail. The other issue on this particular one is associated with commitment number 3, our requested commitment. And that is the R5 zoning district is the most dense zoning district that we do have. And some of those land uses just aren't appropriate at this particular site, given the surrounding sites. So we are requesting a commitment that excludes the higher density developments, and that includes townhomes, which are a 4-unit structure or less, multifamily dwellings, which would be 6-unit structures or less, multifamily dwellings that are 6-unit structures or less, multifamily dwellings that are more than 6-unit structures, manufactured homes, and funeral homes or mortuaries. So those would be uses that would typically be included as permitted uses in the R5 district, and we're asking that those uses be excluded by a recorded commitment with this rezoning. The petitioner has submitted a proposed commitment architectural prohibiting the use of vinyl siding in this development. They did condition that upon that it be substituted with fiber cement siding, and that the fiber cement siding be included as part of the masonry requirements. We probably have to take a look and see if that might require a waiver. I don't think that we could say as a zoning commitment that it would be counted towards a masonry requirement if the zoning ordinance doesn't permit it. That would be something that would have to be asked for as a waiver during a development proposal or a plating proposal. Having said, or maybe a variance to the Board of Zoning Appeals, I need to take a look at that in a little bit more detail. But having said that, we have no objection to vinyl siding being prohibited in the development. I just don't think we could say that fiber cement siding can be considered a masonry for the purposes of the ordinance. I think that would be an approval later by either this body or the Board of Zoning Appeals. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
So this isn't a question more than a request, and maybe you're already tracking on this since our last meeting, staff, but I can't recall what the turning radius request was from the school district. Was it like 60%?
It's 50. I think it was a 50-foot radius so they can turn their buses. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So I guess whenever since this is just a request for approval of zoning and not a plat,
Right.
that's not an issue here, but when it does come up.
I think that, I don't know this for certain, but I mean, Greg would probably know the minimum radius that were required, or Ryan would, either one of them. But I don't know if our ordinance really requires 50 foot. Right. But you're right, that's a condition associated with plating the property.
Okay. Yeah, if you're tracking on that, that will be helpful next time.
So is there a reason why the request is to go to an R5 and then we're adding all of these removals as opposed to approving it for a different type of zoning?
Lot size requirements of the R5 zoning district for 2-family residential lots is smaller. And they
Okay.
need to have that to accommodate, I guess is the wrong way of phrasing it. But there's a lot of this property that's consumed by improvements for adjoining developments. And so in order to put the density they need on there, they need the lot size requirements of the R5 district. So that's the reason for the R5.
And we
zoning
need
request.
to restrict what the R5 usage can be.
All right, R5 and R4 both allows multifamily residential on it. And so multifamily residential wouldn't be appropriate at this location.
Right. Okay.
But 2-family and single-family would.
Okay.
So because that's a permitted use in the district, in order to ensure that, let's say the petitioner decides not to go forward and we've got a property zoned R5, we want to make sure that someone just doesn't swoop in and take that and develop a apartment complex on it. would want to restrict that land use and say that it can only be used for two-family residential.
So then to make sure it'd be clear that just south of that is similar development, two-family homes. So it does have a kind of a continuance there between the, was it Westover?
Yes, it connects a stub street through there. The
Okay, and
proposal would
similar
connect a
type
stub
homes
street.
though.
It is, and it's zoned R5. That two-family residential to the south is zoned R5.
Okay. And I just want to make sure too that, so the most dwelling multifamily more than 6 unit, that's to exclude apartment buildings.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Those are the way I've worded that is exactly from the permitted use table. That's the reason it's worded so strangely, because those are the classifications for townhomes and multifamily residential in the zoning ordinance.
So those can be in R5s and we're excluding them.
By commitment,
by-
right.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Any further questions for staff? Okay, we ask the petitioner to come forward. Would you please state your name and address?
Yes. Jonathan Isaacs, Land Acquisition Manager for MI Homes, locally here in Indianapolis, 8425 Woodfield Crossing, Indianapolis, Indiana 46240. With me tonight is Jeff Banning as well. Banning is doing the engineering for us on this property. I have hopefully a PowerPoint that's going to come up. And I'll try to go through some of this fairly quickly as Bill kind of hit quite a few of the high spots.
Right there, and that's a pointer.
Perfect. So this property is currently owned by the Wesleyan Church Foundation. There's a portion of the property that's also owned by the Wesleyan Crossroads District that houses the church that's locally on the site. And we already talked about the zoning, so I'll skip that. Talked about the master plan, so I'll skip through that. So the slide up here on the screen now highlights the two properties that we have here. This piece here is owned by the Wesleyan Foundation. I don't know exactly for how long that has been, but it has been many, many years this way. And then the Crossroads District Church owns this piece. It's my understanding that there's been a lot of confusion over the ownership of this parcel. The church that was utilizing this building closed in 2020, and the Wesleyan Church is planting a new church that's going to be starting there this fall.
A new congregation?
A new congregation, correct.
That's Nehemiah Church? Is that the name of it?
So they currently own this acreage here. It's about 4 acres. The balance of the property is about 16 acres. That includes a little bit of the pond here. It also includes this road here as well on the acreage. That road, as Bill highlighted, did not have a formal right-of-way grant. We do find an easement that was granted for public use that was done back in the day. And then there's a little piece of property that is still owned by the Wesleyan Foundation on the east side of that roadway. And then there's also an easement that covers the lake that is on this property. And that easement, the way it's defined, goes all the way to the southern property line, crosses the road, and picks up that little triangle piece as well. So it was just kind of a massive easement with a public access easement over the top in that little corner. So when we started looking at this piece, the Wesleyan Foundation came to us. We actually had done another site with the Wesleyan Foundation a few years ago. So when they decided that the soccer program was not going to continue to rent here and they don't see the need for the acreage, the foundation decided it was time to sell. So when I first looked at it, looking at the way that the frontage was divided, I figured we probably needed to come in with some kind of a roadway that lined up with the Beechwood Farms entrance rather than having a roadway that comes in further to the south. So we approached, or I kind of pushed back to the foundation and said, well, what kind of control do you have over the church here? And they said, not very much. They're separate entities, but let's see if we can orchestrate a land swap of sorts where we can acquire some property off of the frontage of their property. And in turn, we'll turn around and give it to them somewhere else on the property. Like for instance, this building that was built not on their property. So the church built a building here, and actually it might've been for the soccer club, was built here actually on the foundation property, not on the church property. So we thought, well, that's a good opportunity to start. They want to keep that detached garage there, storage area for them. So we came in with the idea that we'll have a roadway that lines up here, dive down into the site, and then we have this portion to develop. We believe the lake needs to be bigger. We're still acquiring information, but we don't believe when this church was built that drainage would have been accommodated to go to this lake because the lake wasn't there when the building was built. So there's no real storm sewers for the church today. So we're running under the assumption that that lake has not been sized to handle the 16 or even 20 acres of development. And as we get a deeper dive into the engineering, we'll have those answers. But at this point, the plan that you have in front of you anticipates having that lake be a little bit larger as well. There is a stub street that comes up from Austin Lakes in this location, and we are showing that connection. We did not think a secondary connection around the lake necessarily would have been needed since we already had the one, and we would have another one off of Dan Jones. So with that, we'll move forward here. So this is the highlight as we zoom in, and this is approximately location of the way that the church building will lay out. We might square this up a little bit more here so that these small common areas go to the church. They've asked us in our discussions if there's going to be a playground for our development. Is there some way to do a shared development from that perspective? So right now, the communication that we've had with the church has gone pretty well. One thing that I will point out to you is the church is very adamant about not relocating their driveway today because they don't know what kind of expansions they'll have in the future, and they don't want to put a driveway in a location that causes them heartburn later. So I know that was one of the concerns that will be addressed when we come back for a DPR or a primary plat is access points along the roadway. And then you come in through the development, and we'll have some open space on both sides here, and it terminates into this kind of loop road. We probably do have to look at what these radiuses here are. We may be looking at some subdivision control waivers to do that. We did try to lay something out similar to this, and we really just run out of room based on the constraints of how much ground the church has, the existing lake. You know, if the lake wasn't there, we'd have a lot more flexibility with the design of the site. But the lake really provides a pretty good restriction on the site from a development perspective. So this is just kind of showing the red line is what the church currently owns, and the yellow would be something similar to what the church would get, with the idea that they end up with the same amount of acreage that they started with. The homes that we are proposing are paired homes. They're two-story homes, and mostly 3 bedrooms. So they're basically like a single-family house put together, or maybe like some would consider like a townhouse. they're not stacked. So if I own a house, I own the left or I own the right. They're fee simple. We do them as a single family development. So you get a deed just like you do a single family residence. The exterior maintenance will be maintained by the homeowners association. So things like roofs, siding, concrete walkways, kind of the big ticket items that someone would have to maintain. We're not going to get into a situation where half a roof has to be replaced and you end up with two colored roofs, or just the wear and tear of two different roofs that are different ages. If the building needs it, both sides get it, and the HOA will govern that. And then they'll also do all the lawn care, snow removal, and things like that as part of the HOA as well. The zoning commitments, we are in agreement with these. We agree that there should be a 60-foot half dedicated right away to Dan Jones. I can speak for my seller. I cannot speak for the church. We are talking with the church, and I believe we will come to an agreement on them agreeing to the dedication of right away by the time we come back for a primary plat. We agree to delaying the reconstruction of the existing sidewalk into the multi-use trail, which will be part of your Dan Jones improvement, as well as money towards the reconstruction of Dan Jones Road. So we have assigned $10,000 to the multi-use trail and $50,000 to the road improvements that we write a check. It's earmarked for the local share match of the road reconstruction for Dan Jones Road. We're in agreement with the structures, limiting the uses to 2 units or single family detached homes. The only thing that I would highlight is the church wants to be able to continue to operate as a church. So the property that the church ends up with, churches would also be allowed, and whatever associated uses that a church would be allowed to have. So as we craft that language into a zoning commitment, that's the intent there. And then again, we've agreed that we will do no vinyl siding. I believe your ordinance is somewhat silent to what masonry means. I know that having built in other communities within Avon, hardy plank or fiber cement siding has been utilized as a masonry material. So what we'd like to do is exchange the fiber cement on all 4 sides for any brick requirement that you would have on the front. Now, with that, our product does have masonry on the front elevations, but there's some standards about where you're located, whether or not you have to have 100% masonry and things like that. And we're just hoping that we can get away from just identifying what percentage of masonry there is in exchange for no vinyl. With that, that is our presentation. I'll entertain any questions that you might have. Thank you.
I don't know if this is a question for you or if it's a question for Bill, but we're talking about rezoning the entire 20 acres, not just the part that's going to be partitioned off for the residential usage, correct?
Yeah.
So how does rezoning the entire 20 acres impact church usage?
In the R1 zoning district, a church is permitted by special exception. In the R5 zoning district, it's permitted by right. So you're actually changing it from essentially a special exception use to a use that's permitted by right.
So there would be nothing about changing this zoning that would impact the ability of the church to continue using their portion in the way they have always used it?
No, I mean, if they may have to, if it's a fairly significant improvement, they may have to go through a development plan review process.
But no zoning issues?
But they wouldn't have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals to get a special exception or anything like that. They could just go straight to a development plan review petition. And if it's something small enough where we could administratively review it and approve it, might be able to go straight to permits. It just depends on what they're proposing.
Okay.
Yeah, my point of clarifying was to not place a undue restriction when I make a zoning commitment to the rezone. That a church use would still be permitted on the piece that the church will retain.
So is the gentleman's agreement right now, the land swap, that's not for sure yet, right? Is it depending on zoning approval and all that?
Yeah, so my agreement is with the foundation, and the foundation is working with the church on the land swap. So ultimately, the land swap will have to be consistent with the ability to have a primary plat approved for the project. So that'll identify the exact dimensions of the parcel that we end up buying. So we're not in a position to say absolute today, because when we get into final engineering, we'll identify that exact parcel boundary.
I just think from a safety standpoint, we had this come up in another meeting a month or so ago. I think I'm really glad you're going that way, because I think that's what needs to happen here, to have the same, be right across from Beechwood or whatever the name of the subdivision is across. So Bill, I don't know if is that something we need to try to lock in now, or will that come back up later to make certain? I don't want to see, I guess I'd kind of like make a condition that intersection is, that entryway is across from the other one.
That would be part of plating though, right?
Yeah, I guess you could. We hadn't thought about that just because the petitioner is the one that came in and suggested that. And so if we figured if the petitioner was suggesting it, that would be fine. There will be some negotiations during a plating process from the standpoint of the location of that curb cuts, because the church's existing access point sort of causes a violation of the Signature Streets overlay. So there might be some waiver requests during plating that the Plan Commission will have to see, depending on the status of those cuts. I know that the preference of the town is for the church to gain access from the new street. And that we're willing, but again, that's an approval for a separate, at the plating process.
So that'll come back to us later. Okay. Because that's key to me, I think, in this thing.
Yeah, I mean, we would want that. I think that the Public Works Department would require those to be, aligned.
Thank you.
The big question is the second cut. And Public Works is leaning towards requiring that church to connect to the new street and getting rid of that cut on Dan Jones Road.
Why is that?
Because there's a separation requirement in the Signature Streets.
They just don't want other
overlay.
cars stopping again it's too close to this intersection to have other cars slowing down and turn into the church parking lot.
Yeah, the intersections are too close. The curb cuts are too close.
So they would like to have the church to share this same entryway that we want to have across from the subdivision.
Yeah, and bring that entrance to a 90 degrees south and connect onto the new street. But that's, like I said, that's a discussion at the planning process, not necessarily, we want to leave a little bit of flexibility and not make it a zoning commitment, because we don't really know the exact verbiage we would need on that commitment.
If I can add one more thing, my contract with the foundation has to have my entrance line up to Beechwood.
Thank you, sir.
That was a no-brainer for me. I
Appreciate
wasn't coming without it.
Further questions for the petitioner? If there are no further questions for the petitioner, we would move on to public comments. Is there anybody present who would like to speak? Then we are closed for public comments discussion.
I appreciate the town staff's, work on this, as well as the commitments they've recommended. So appreciate that.
So based on the petitioner is wanting the commitment of getting credit for the different siding. And you were saying earlier, Bill, that we can't necessarily do that. So
Yeah, I'm not certain if, and I didn't have the elevations of the building, so I couldn't do the calculations and do the deep dive. It's normally something I would do during subdivision request. Anyway, but I'm not entirely certain if it's a requirement of the ordinance, which the architectural standards are. It's either a variance to the Board of Zoning Appeals or it is a waiver to the Plan Commission. In other words, you can't make a zoning commitment to give you relief from a zoning requirement. You have a specific pathway to that. And that's the only reason I'm uncomfortable with that language, because I'm not entirely certain that the Plan Commission would have the authority to say, yeah, we're going to consider masonry a masonry for the purposes of this development, if the ordinance doesn't let you do that. You know what I'm saying? And that they would either need to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a variance, or if the ordinance itself specifies that the Plan Commission can waive that requirement at the time of plating, that might be the correct procedural call on that one. I'm just concerned that that commitment, as the petitioner wrote it, wouldn't necessarily be enforceable.
And we may be putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah, I just don't think that, I'm not entirely certain that the Plan Commission has the authority to sort of issue a blank waiver on an architectural standard at the time of rezoning by a commitment. I think that they would have to go through a waiver process during the appropriate approval time, or a variance to the Board of Zoning Appeals to get relief from that requirement, if we decide that that relief is necessary. I mean, that's normally a review we would do at a later point in the approval process.
Okay.
It's just like the masonry requirements on the Ronald Reagan Corridor Overlay District. We would do those at development plan approval. And if, let's say, someone were doing a straight rezoning and they said, but we want this to count towards our masonry requirements for Ronald Reagan, but the Ronald Reagan Corridor specifically says, no, you can't do that. You can't, it doesn't align. Now, I honestly don't know in this particular instance whether that's the case. I'm just concerned that you'd stick that on a commitment and then they would have a different approval path later on to get relief from those requirements. That's my only concern with it. From a
that's why we
planner's
have Mitchell.
perspective, huh?
And that's why we have Mitchell.
Yeah, from a planner's perspective, I mean, I would say that fiber cement siding, quote, should, unquote, count as masonry. But there's been discussion from both this body and the town council, who are not entirely 100% behind that requirement. That I don't think the town council really wants fiber cement siding to be counted towards masonry. But I haven't done the deep dive in the ordinance to see if that's really something that we can do.
Any further discussion?
I'll just add one thing, Catherine, that I agree. I think just off the top of my head, I don't have the zoning ordinance memorized, but I think this would be a variance that would go to the BZA, which gives
That's what
me
I'm thinking
even
too.
more hesitation, because then you're waiving BZA decisions and you're the Plan Commission. So I agree with Bill that I think either that commitment falls off, or if the petitioner is willing to take off that that second piece there, then that's fine too. But I wouldn't want to forward it, because I agree with Bill. I don't think it's enforceable from your guys' standpoint.
So my concern was, earlier we had the earlier petition with 3 commitments. We left 2 of them off because the petitioner didn't agree with them. So if we have one here that we're wanting to say no vinyl siding, and they're wanting to say they get that credit, but we can't resolve that.
Well, the sample actually does exactly where you're going, I think. It just simply says that vinyl siding shall be prohibited and doesn't say anything about getting a credit towards masonry on the fiber
But would the
cement.
petitioner agree to that commitment? I guess without that clause is what I was trying to
Well,
figure out.
if I could make a recommendation, if we can eliminate any discussion about the fiber cement siding brick requirement, your ordinance is very clear on what architectural standards are. And we can have that discussion at the DPR stage. And if I come back and say, I want to exchange eliminate vinyl, but I want the A standard and that takes me to the BCA, then I know what that process is at that point in time.
Okay.
So just to be clear then, at this time, you don't want to make a commitment to no vinyl siding.
Correct. I would just follow your ordinance. It's essentially eliminating vinyl siding because it only allows me to do like 25% on so many of the elevations. So
So that would mean removing number 4 on the sample.
So,
I thought part of the
yeah,
allowing the R5 zoning and then disallowing apartments and townhomes and stuff. I thought that was part of what was wanted. If you don't say no vinyl siding.
yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable with what the town's recommendation, 1 through 4. I think there is a distinction between this and the earlier petition, because they've submitted waivers, and we're going to be addressing those at the next meeting, whenever that's calendared. Let's keep it simple and keep it to zoning and the staff's recommendation. That's kind of my perspective.
I agree.
I agree. You're saying, Mason, you're saying leave number 4 in, right?
Yeah,
I
think it
agree.
needs to stay because you made the comment earlier is if this fell through and someone else came in and just decided to, build something else, it would be helpful.
Well, and that's why we have experts on our staff, is so that they can say, this is what we think you should do.
So question then, Mitchell, if we're talking about commitments, is this an agreement with the petitioner that they have to agree to the commitment to include that into the motion?
Correct, and it seems that the petitioner is not willing to agree to number 4 as the town has requested it. So then it would go back to, this is going to be brought back again at the DPR, the plating stages, and come before you again. And then they'll have more of their conceptual plans done at that point and figure out exactly if they're going to use any vinyl or how much percentage or what architectural features are going to include. So I would say if the planning commission is uncomfortable with that, then again, just dropping number 4 because it's not a commitment from the petitioner and then letting it default to our zoning standards.
And then it can be represented and re-argued
It will be,
at a
yes.
later date.
Because it seems like he will go through that process, yes.
Okay. Is that something you're comfortable with?
yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Any further discussion?
So sorry, not to drag this out, but so.
Fine.
Thanks. So either way, this is going to have to be discussed, whether vinyl will be permitted or not, correct?
Yeah,
Whether there's commitment or not, it will need to be discussed, debated, and determined at some future date, correct?
yeah, if the ordinance, if we default to the base standards of the zoning ordinance, vinyl would be required, or would be not required,
Permissible.
would be permissible, yeah. The question will be, of course, is whether they can get through the town council without prohibiting vinyl.
I think
Even
that's
if
the
you
bigger
guys do a
question.
recommendation, if you guys do a recommendation and suggest 3 commitments, maybe the town council wants that prohibition, which they would be able to, under state law now, fix to the rezoning, but.
I think there is value in making including information in whatever decision we make as to how we feel. So if we as a commission feel that vinyl should be permissible, then kick it out. But if we feel strongly that it should be restricted and not included, that it should be prohibited, then we should keep 4 in. So that would be my one observation.
I think that we've got 2 different questions. The first question is the vinyl. Do we want to go ahead and keep in the language that says the use of vinyl siding shall be prohibited? And then that just covers it. It's prohibited. And then we have the second question of the cement fiber. And that's something that's going to be a lot trickier because we've got questions as to whether or not that's a waiver through the BZA. Does it come through the planning commission? That's a different conversation as opposed to, do we leave open the possibility of using vinyl or do we eliminate the possibility of using vinyl?
So to that latter point, that to me it involves hearing from staff and others as to whether that qualifies as masonry, and that's a conversation for another time personally.
Right,
And
right.
so I would be inclined to just go with the staff's recommendation. And then again, at some future date, the petitioner can make that argument and we can hear from, both parties.
Mitchell, can you clarify, if we stick with number 4, the use of vinyl siding shall be prohibited in the development, what does that do as far as the petitioner's options of using vinyl siding? Like,
Well,
we
it-
want to use 10% vinyl siding on these little teeny tiny gables.
Yeah, I'll let Bill speak to that because I'm not quite familiar with the zoning ordinance in that capacity. But it wouldn't be a commitment. So you'd be switching it to a condition. And then let's also remember that we are making a recommendation to the town council. So one thing that you could consider is if number 4 drops out, then does that change your consideration of whether you want to forward a positive or negative recommendation based off of the 5 criteria in our ordinance? Again, it's at this stage, we typically try to get as many commitments as possible. And then the conditions can certainly come later in the negotiation process with the town council. But as a recommending body, I think it's easier and safer to not impose conditions at this stage and maybe frame it in your mind as if that number 4 is dropped, does that change or sway whether I'm going to vote for a positive or negative recommendation to the town council?
Can we impose conditions in a zoning recommendation?
You can, yes.
Okay.
Reasonable conditions that have a nexus to the deficiency that's provided in your decision-making process.
I can ask I'm sorry, if I might have the petitioner step forward again. So you had said you would be happy for us to eliminate the condition or the commitment of no use of vinyl siding. Is that just simply a way of trying to accommodate us here, or is that something you would actually prefer so that you can leave that option open?
So I believe that your ordinance is very specific about architectural requirements and what masonry is, when masonry is to be used. For instance, when a residential structure butts a perimeter road or a less intense residential zoning district, which conceivably I am going to be a less restrictive zoning district, Austin Lakes, that is 100% vinyl neighborhood, that I would have to put masonry on all 4 sides of my structures at a 50% ratio.
And
That's what your ordinance says today.
okay,
So masonry, I don't think is a defined term in your ordinance. And I believe in your proposed UDO, masonry is a defined term and hardy plank or fiber cement siding is going to be defined in your revised UDO. So I'm the one that brought the commitment to the table as a voluntary commitment that we would restrict the use of vinyl. But at the bare minimum, I would not be allowed to have more than 50% vinyl on my structures if your ordinance says I can not have, if I have to have 50% masonry on all 4 sides of my structures when I'm on the perimeter facing a less intensive use.
so
So
you would agree with the use of vinyl siding shall be prohibited in the development. That would be a commitment from you?
that was depending on when's the appropriate time to have that discussion.
Okay.
Because if I do that, if I have now I'm going to be 50% masonry and I'm going to be hardy plank siding on all 4 sides of the structure. I don't know if that's truly the intent. That was not my intent. And I didn't print off the whole section of your architecture ordinance, but there is a section in your ordinance that talks about what masonry is.
Okay.
So I'd prefer that your ordinance has an architectural requirement. We walk out of here with what the ordinance requires. This is a straight zoning. This is not a PUD. I don't think we can, I don't believe we can do a zoning condition on a straight zoning. If this was a PUD, yes. But on straight zoning, it is, is this an appropriate land use? If it's an appropriate land use, are you behind what your ordinance, allows for? And I believe that we will have this discussion at a later date regarding eliminating vinyl on these homes.
So we've talked about this until it is ready to be pulled out and served. I think I agree based upon the petitioner's input and input from council and Mr. Peoples that removing number 4 makes the most sense. I think there needs to be a lot of conversation about about how you're going to develop the homes. And there is still the open question as to whether or not fiber cement siding or hardy plank counts as masonry, and that's not something we're going to resolve tonight. That's my 2 cents.
I would agree.
To me, it seems simple that just don't allow vinyl siding. I mean, the mason, to me, that seems like a separate question, whether the plank is considered masonry or not. And if it's not, then you just put some more plank, you have to use more plank. I mean, but we don't want to put vinyl up. I don't understand. I'm a common sense guy. If we don't want vinyl in this thing, we just say we don't want vinyl. That's the way we vote.
The problem is that we don't, as I understand it, is that there isn't necessarily a clear-cut option with regards to being the ability to use hardy plank or as far as what the definition of masonry is. I think that's my understanding, is that that's the question, is that saying we shall not use vinyl doesn't necessarily mean you can use everything else, because we don't know if we can use everything else.
So again, going back, Bill and Mitchell, that if we remove number 4, there's still discussions that you're going to be having with the developer that will talk about what will be on the houses. So whether it's vinyl or hardy plank or stone or brick, that's part of what you'll be talking about. So either BZA may see a variance request, we could maybe see a waiver, but it doesn't say we won't have vinyl. It just means you guys will be bringing forward the appropriate actions that's needed if that's what the petitioner is going to request.
And we could see a plan that doesn't include vinyl.
Yeah.
Right, but right now but under the ordinances, they can have vinyl. As of right now, they can, correct?
Yes, that's right. They can have vinyl on it right now, and I think what the petitioner is saying.
What's the percentage on that?
Yeah. He's right. I mean, if it abuts a street or a park or an area of lower density, then it would be half of the building has to be masonry.
So then,
and he's right that the definition of masonry is not defined in this ordinance.
so one option is if we can't get the commitment to no vinyl, then we move forward an unfavorable recommendation on the zoning request so that we don't zone to R5 that will allow vinyl.
Well, there's 2 options. You can do it unfavorable, or you can do a condition, but the condition wasn't recommended.
Or we could table this to
And this issue, again, it's discretionary on your end. It's also discretionary when the town council reviews it. So I think that this conversation has probably sent a pretty good message to the petitioner, and they can certainly go back and tweak things, and then they'll go in front of the town council twice, and they'll have their discretion on your guys's.
Giving the petitioner a second bite at the apple in order to come back with more clarity, perhaps that would be best for all parties.
So if we leave number 4 in, is the petitioner going to walk away from the deal? I mean, he brought it in. Didn't he agree to have number 4 in, Bill? Isn't that?
No. The wording on his commitment was different than the wording on mine. So that's the source of contention.
Then maybe I misunderstood. I thought you were in agreement with number 4 when you first started talking tonight.
I'm in agreement with number 4 if hardy plank siding can meet some of my masonry requirement.
Well, I think that's I think that's, I don't know why anybody would say it wouldn't.
So-
But maybe there is, but,
Because it hasn't been defined.
well, but then we had that discussion whenever that point comes up as to whether where that ratio, again, I don't see how that affects vinyl. I
Well,
mean,
that's why, for me, I'm inclined to say, let's table it, get.
I'd prefer not to take a table because
Yeah, I don't think tabling it either.
a tabling is going to prevent us from
Don't
being
get
able to get started this
definition.
year.
I mean,
So, which we're already kind of up against it. So, we're heading into March. 6 months from now, I'd hope to be able to have, construction plan approval. Another month delay, guaranteed that doesn't get done.
Would you be willing to agree to the commitment to not use vinyl siding without any other conditions?
I have a heart well, I mean, if that's the way to get out of here, the project might not happen. But yeah, I will make that commitment.
because you're afraid that we'll come back and say you have to have all this brick and we won't count the concrete fiber. You're thinking we may strong arm you into that.
To have a 50% all brick structure and hardy plank is going to take me out of the market.
I don't think it's going to happen, but I mean,
But
some
that's-
things are based on trust.
But that is my concern. I mean, that's,
And some of that is out of our hands, I believe. Correct? Since we don't have a definition.
Yeah, the problem is the interpretation of the ordinance. So what is masonry? And it seems like an easy question. But the problem I've got in this ordinance is that masonry means one thing in, say, the overlay, in the 36 overlay. It means something different in the Ronald Reagan overlay. It means something different in the Signature Streets overlay, and it's undefined elsewhere. And that's the problem with the ordinance that I have right now is, okay, what is the definition of masonry? And how can I make this this definition consistent across all of them? And that's the reason why I've been zipping back and forth between the different ones. He's right. If I go strictly by the architectural standards in the residential district, I think that I could say, yes, hardy plank would be considered a masonry requirement in that provision.
Can we state that tonight? Can we-
I don't think
I don't
that's a good
think,
idea.
we're not on that, we don't have that authority, right? I mean, we're basically legislating.
so
It's micromanaging.
I guess to move me along, I'll take Bill's language and we'll have this answer before we get to council.
Let me ask a question. Who makes the ultimate, what body will end up making the ultimate decision as to what masonry is, and when will that happen? Is that the UDO?
Well, no, this will probably be, this will,
Is this just a glaring hole in the ordinance?
This can't.
it's
be-
a hole in this ordinance just because of the way masonry is treated differently in like 3 or 4 different places. I know it seems, I know it's a common sense, but there are certain areas of this ordinance where things like certain bricks and stones that aren't considered masonry, like quick brick and those sorts of things.
And do we have a clear
We don't have a,
determination as to which of those ordinances governs here?
if I were to make an interpretation on the fly, I guess I would say that it was the Board of Zoning Appeals. Just because the provision that we're quoting, section 8-5, does not have a provision allowing for a waiver by the Plan Commission. However, masonry is, this is why I didn't do the deep dive on this beforehand, and I was just trying to make it easy. Because what I have to do as an interpretation is I have to be consistent amongst the entire ordinance. And so I got to make sure that what is considered ordinance masonry in this is the same thing that's considered masonry in the Ronald Reagan and in the US 36 and the Signature Streets. I've got to get all those things meshing.
But I think we just got an agreement.
It could be a problem.
Well, I think we got an agreement from the petitioner to take it as it is. And then he would have the time, by the time he goes before the town council, to bring any more data.
Yeah.
Mitchell, I got a question as far as that goes. Just want to make sure that, that's a adequate commitment, that's not made under duress, and we're creating a situation that could come up later.
And I don't want to create a situation where the developer finds themselves in being forced to build properties that cannot reach the price point that he needs because the building costs are too high because of the decision we're making tonight.
No one's forcing a developer to build.
Well, that's true.
their
I agree,
choice.
but
I'm going to go back to my question I asked, or is that the commitment appropriate? Just to make sure that we're not creating a situation under.
The petitioner is free to commit to whatever he wants to, but maybe just because we've talked around this, maybe you can state what you're willing to commit to one more time for clarification purposes.
I'll agree with the way staff wrote commitment number 4.
Okay,
I'll be glad to make a motion.
and let's hear a motion.
I move that we forward ZA 22-03 Westland Investment Foundation Properties a request for approval of the zoning amendment to 20 acres from single-family residential R1 to multiple-family residential R5 to the town council with a favorable recommendation, subject to the following commitments. 1, a 60-foot half right-of-way shall be dedicated along Dan Jones Road. 2, a restrictive donation for the construction of a multi-use trail shall be done to the town of Avon for the cost of construction. 3, the permitted uses shall exclude townhouse 4-unit structures or less, dwelling multifamily 6-unit structures or less, dwelling multifamily more than 6-unit structures, dwellings, manufactured homes, and funeral homes and mortuaries. And number 4, the use of vinyl siding shall be prohibited in the development.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion on the motion? Let's take a vote.
Catherine Ransby.
4.
Paul Newberger.
4.
Dave Kaufman.
4.
Nathan Pike.
4.
Ed Rosenbaum.
4.
Harold Iser. 4.
Okay, do we have any other business?
I'll make a commitment to the petitioner that I will do an interpretation memorandum on this topic before it goes to the plan commit or the town council, okay? All right, so there won't be this, at the town council, there won't be this issue, and you'll have it in writing.
And do we have any further business? Motion to adjourn?
So move, please.
All in
Second.
favor? Adjourn.